Everybody, what's up? Welcome back to Lance Independent. So last week, I was supposed to talk about the halfway fallacy, which is a fallacy that I've proposed. I kind of invented it. And I ended up talking about other stuff. And then we had some people join the chat and had a live conversation. So we didn't get to it. So today, I'm going to get to that first. And then I've invited a few people that may want to join the stream. And we'll see if they want to do that and talk. I've got a lot more time today. I'm feeling a lot better. For those of you who don't know, I had a procedure done. It made it a bit hard to talk, and it caused some complications. And at least today, I could talk. So I've got at least a couple hours if you know I end up wanting to use it. So yeah, someone in the chat said you only got halfway last time. So I'm going to get into the halfway fallacy first, and then we're going to see if other people want to join. So let me first say hi to everybody that's here. Hey, Travis. So I was just in another stream because metaethics came up, and I'm always hunting down streams and videos and anywhere where moral realism or metaethics comes up, and then I'll pop in. So if you're talking about metaethics, there is a chance I am somewhere in the audience listening, and you know, I might jump out and go, if there's any opportunity for me to get involved in the conversation. Okay, so we got Ed. Hey, Lance. Hey, how's it going? We got this remark. You only got halfway last time. We got to wait for Joe to show up and tell me that I'm suppressing truth and righteousness and truth, whatever the phrase is. I don't even remember. All right. Happy to join for a long form conversation. Awesome. So I do have some other people too. So we could just get people in here. If I get to sit back and let other people talk, I would absolutely love to do that. It would just be great to see the dynamics that emerge when other people talk. So we'll see. If you don't want to talk to somebody else, I'm happy to talk to you and like go back and forth with different people answering different questions, whatever. We'll just see what happens. I want this to be more open-ended and more free-flowing than it has been. All right. Yes, please. Or you can keep your camera off. That's totally fine as well. You don't have to go on camera. It's just, you know, if you're going to go on camera, don't start screaming things and no profanity and no bringing up off-topic stuff, like any off-topic stuff. I don't care if it's stuff that is like really awful and I wouldn't want to hear it, or even if it's just like you want to talk for 3 hours about, I don't know, a vacation you went on. Like it might be interesting. It's not for this channel. So you could pop into my Discord and talk about your vacation all you want. We have areas in the Discord that are more like chill, casual conversation. And also for people that are returning, I do have a Discord. I do have a blog. I'm trying to build up the Discord community. If you've been in, so it's been almost 2 months now that I've had the Discord, and I'm really trying to make it a place where it's not a bunch of people screaming at each other or having terrible, awful conversations. We're trying to make it a less unruly place to be. And so if you get in there and people are being unruly, you could let me know, and I'll try to get them to pipe down. If they're breaking rules, you know, then we'll deal with it. So, you know, I'm trying to make that. I've got the Substack going. It's still going strong. I've got posts out the wazoo, like forever. So got so many posts going on. I don't even know what to do with them all. So really, though, that's going to slow down in the fall because I'm going to be working a lot more, and I'm going to be really hunkering down to get papers published. And that's just going to start sucking up more of my time. The blog is definitely not going anywhere. So I have too much stuff I could say. I've got like the Twitter Tuesday post. So every Tuesday I have a post where I take something someone has said. It's almost always about metaethics, but not always. And I respond to that on my blog. So I did a long series responding to a conversation. I got like 5 or 6 posts out of one conversation on Twitter. So for people that are familiar with me, you know that I could talk a whole lot about very little. There should be a video. I did a guest appearance on another channel. I should be reloading it, uploading it on my channel as well. I don't know when that's going to be up, but it's going to be probably in the next couple of days. And the great news is I have a whole ton of people scheduled to talk to. I've got moral philosophers and other sorts of people. I think it's mostly moral philosophers that I'll be talking to. So I'm going to have a bunch of channels. A bunch of videos that's not just the live streams on Saturday. I'm going to keep doing these. I'd like to engage with my audience and talk to you, but I'm also going to have a lot of these. It's going to be people that it's not like a debate because they're not like moral realist and we're going to like, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Rah. You know, it's not like that. It's more like, hey, here's a person that does cool, interesting stuff that I like, and we're going to have a discussion about it. And I also have another person coming on here that mostly has, we have probably some differences, I don't even know, and quite a lot of similarities. And so we're just gonna talk and see how the conversation goes. So I'm still totally up for conversations with people that super duper disagree with me. I just haven't managed to coordinate any of those yet. If there are people that would want to, I don't want to have like a standard formatted debate. I don't like those. But if people really mega ultra disagree with me and they're more realist and they want to dispute things, happy to talk to them too. And I'd love to set those up as well. Okay. We got another hi. Hello. Yeah, depending on the, I mean, profanity is fine. I just don't want people going like shit all day long. Yeah, not because, so if I'm off camera and I'm like hanging out with my wife, I'll say whatever. But I just, you have this thing where if people are too wild on my channel, then a lot of people that are really trying to cultivate like a professional vibe are just not going to want to like jump into the mud pit, So even if I personally like a bit of mud, I understand why a lot of people wouldn't want to do that, and so I've started to avoid it myself. It might seem like I'm very anti-mud, but it's really painful to not just unleash and be like that's really more the person I am, and so I don't know. Yeah, see, my preferred mode of debate is very aggressive. So that I used to be more like that, but less so now. Hey, another person. Oh, yeah. So with the PhD, typically you have a few options because the PhD is in psychology. You have options in both private industry and academia. I'm still pushing for more academic positions, but it's not something I'm going to get into just yet with exactly what I'm going to be doing. That's for probably about a month or two from now. I'll talk more about that. So, but for now, I'm sticking with research. But psychologists, especially, depending on the type of training they have, can work in the private industry, especially because these days, a lot of the psychological training you get for experimental psychology degrees, like mine, social psych, a lot of people get more technical with stuff. So, you use R or that sort of thing. And that kind of data analytic knowledge and skill set can be leveraged for working outside of academia, and often that pays a lot more. It's I don't know enough about it to know whether I would like that or not. I've always seen myself as more academically oriented, but some of my colleagues and the people that I went to grad school with are doing those jobs and they seem to be loving it. But of course, people are going to self-select into jobs that they love. So I don't know, but but with a philosophy PhD, typically you would end up being a philosophy instructor or professor of some kind. But I have the master's in philosophy and the PhD in psychology. So that gives me, in some respects, more options. In others, because of my interests, because they're so interdisciplinary, it actually narrows what I could do quite a bit, because a lot of psychology departments might see me more as a philosopher and a lot of philosophy departments might see me as more of a psychologist. In fact, they almost certainly would, because they don't even have a PhD in philosophy. And so, philosophy is a little more exclusive in that respect. I think it would be pretty tough to get into a philosophy teaching position, especially some kind of tenure track professor position, without a PhD in philosophy. So that can make things a bit dicey on that front. All right, so there's still, I got a flood of comments this time, so this is awesome. So, but I'll still get into the halfway fallacy. I'm gonna get into it, even if it takes me 10 minutes to get there, which it's already been almost 10 minutes. Okay. I saw you commenting on Perspective Philosophy's live reaction to one of your debates. Are you planning on debating Perspective Philosophy anytime soon? He seems like he's really interested in doing that. Yeah, so this is, it's tough. Okay. So Perspective Philosophy has another channel. There was a review of my debate with Richard Brown. And apparently when I saw it, it was like the second part of the review, but I didn't see the other one. So I guess it was like made hidden or private or whatever until it's edited and then re-released, or maybe it's just not going to be, I don't really know. But it was a live reaction to that debate. I did think it was quite a lot of fun that Perspective was critiquing both of us. Like, well, I disagree with everything Lance is saying, but Richard Brown could have made a better point here. I thought that was really cool. I like that Perspective is just very blunt about basically saying, I disagree with Lance about everything. Lance, like, I think at one point, I don't know if it was anti-realism or another view that I hold. One of the views was, I think, called trash, like the view is trash, which that's the kind of like way of framing things that I think would make a lot of really professorial people a little uncomfortable. But for me, I like that. I think it's, you have to be careful not, I hopefully to not be disrespectful or rude or mean to individuals, but saying, hey, I think your view is trash, while being friendly to the person. That's just honest. If you think a view is trash, say it's trash, you know? So I think that that's cool. I like that. So I'd like to have a discussion. So what concerns me is that I've seen some of Perspective's videos, and I have trouble like that. So someone that's really steeped in the Hegelian approach to things, that approach has a certain way of framing things, a certain type of a sort of proprietary way of framing and discussing topics in a way that I find so difficult to engage with. I feel like I would need to read it like a whole bunch of material. I have a whole bunch of sort of preliminary conversations in order to really track what is even being said. And so the part of the concern that I would have with having that conversation is that the conversation would go like this. Perspective would say some things, even if it could be relatively short, or it could be quite like, long, some of this stuff is complicated. It takes a while to get it all out. And then I would listen, and then I would go, I didn't understand that. And then Perspective might say, okay, well, which part didn't you understand? And I would say, all of it. And then there would be this back and forth where I'm just trying to understand individual words. And like, basically it would need to become a sort of crash course in like Hegelian philosophy or something like that. I don't know if Perspective wants to do that. I'm down to do that, as long as there's an understanding that, look, I'm a person that a lot of times in philosophical discussions, I get real picky about what people mean by the words that they're using, because the kinds of stuff I talk about, normative entanglement, a lot of the sort of pragmatics and the importance that those play, the importance pragmatics play in rhetorical framing that a lot of analytic philosophers use. I'm not talking about Perspective here. I'm talking about analytic philosophers will, for those of you who are familiar with me will know that they'll say stuff like, do you think murder is wrong? And if you say yes, they're like, aha, so you have realist intuitions. No, I think it's wrong in a way consistent with anti-realism. But if you say no, then they're like, oh my God, you don't think murder? Like it's a trap. It's a verbal trap. And I have a post coming out about that. Oh, wait, did I have that? Yeah, I have that finished. So that's one of the ones that's scheduled to come out. So that post, and I will guarantee I'll be doing a video on it. What I did is I kind of, I created a sort of generalized master argument for normative entanglement that generalizes to a sort of standard type of argument that philosophers use. But I'll set that aside for a minute. If someone wants to flag that and ask me about that, I could tell you the name of this move and briefly describe it here. Maybe people will appreciate that and enjoy that. But I'll talk about it in more detail once the blog post is out, and then the video that accompanies that will come out sometime after that. Okay, so my concern really is just that it would take a lot of discussion for us to potentially start understanding one another. I do think that Perspective will probably have an easier time understanding, even if there's a continuation of disagreement. My point of view, then I would have understanding that point of view. I'm not sure how valuable that would be to my audience. Like I would enjoy trying to understand very different philosophical perspectives, but I don't know if my audience would like that. So what I was saying is, I'm already really sort of picky about the way that people frame things, even when they're framing them in ways that would typically be thought of as fairly clear. I'm still going to be pretty picky, and I think for good reason. In part because of the sort of rhetorical stuff that people sometimes use. Again, nothing to do with Perspective. This has to do with how analytic, like standard, like I'm talking about analytic, contemporary analytic realist, which just has nothing to do with the way that Perspective discusses this sort of thing. Anyway, so a debate, I feel like there would need to be a lot of preliminary discussion to really, for me at least, to try to understand Perspective's view, possibly for Perspective to understand where I'm coming from. So I remember Perspective made some comment about rejecting psychology. So I should just say, just as I'm extremely critical, like metaphilosophically, of the bulk of analytic philosophy and its methods. If anything, I don't know if I'd say equally, but I'm comparably, it's like in the ballpark, super duper critical of psychological methods as well. So pretty much all of my work in psychology centers on, not all of it, but pretty much all of it centers on critiques of the methods that psychologists use. So most of my published papers are about issues in validity and misoperationalization and problems with study design and pointing out methodological problems in studies. My dissertation is pretty much exclusively that. Not only do I critique studies, even the empirical studies are empirical studies designed, they're in a certain sense meta studies that are designed to illustrate methodological problems with other studies. I've also proposed a kind of Drake equation for giving a rough estimate of the amount of substantive, non-negligible, real psychological effects. So if you're not familiar with the Drake equation, this was proposed as a way of estimating, I believe, the number of currently existing, like the number of extant communicating alien civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy. I think it was really that specific. It wasn't an estimate of like just how many planets have alien life on them. But the way it works is you could say, okay, well, you basically plug in your estimates for a set of numbers, and then you use that whole set, you sort of multiply all of those by one another, and then you get the product, and the product tells you the proportion or the number of I don't think it's a proportion. It's like a raw number. It's like the raw number of intelligent communicating civilizations that currently exist in the Milky Way that are trying to contact us. And the way that would work would be roughly something like this. We could look it up, but whatever, that always takes time. But you would say, okay, well, how many stars are in the Milky Way? Let's say you say 200 billion. Out of those, how many have planets? Let's say it's most of them. It's 100 billion. Out of those, how many of the 100 billion are habitable? Let's say 1%. Okay, what is that? Oh, 1 billion, right? Out of the 1 billion, how many actually do have life? Let's say you say 1 million of them have life. Out of the 1 million that have life, how many have intelligent life or had intelligent life on them at some point? Let's say it's just 1,000. And then out of the 1,000, how many are currently trying to communicate with us? Let's say it's 3. So then there's your estimate. And so you could move down that sort of cascade of estimates and you get your sort of final estimate. I've suggested that we could do something fairly similar for psychology. So let's just focus on social psychological findings. The way that might work is you could say, okay, what's the proportion of psychological studies that are replicable? Like if you reran the study in an effort to try to yield the same results using the same methods and the same context and so on, to the best of your ability. Of course, you can't roll back time and do exactly the same study, but you could do your best to attempt to replicate the study and approximately replicate it. What proportion of studies in social psychology are actually replicable? Well, back in 2015, there was a paper that attempted to replicate studies from 3 different psychology journals. I think it wasn't only social psychology, but it was 3 like high-profile journals. And they got, I think, depending on how you estimate it, 36 or 39%. I think part of one was like, is the p-value significant in the same direction or something like that? They're mostly using two-tailed tests, so whatever. Not that, well, whatever. I'm not going to get into why that doesn't matter, but it doesn't. And then they asked the researchers, whether they judge them to have replicated the results. And I think that might've been 39%. The numbers here aren't super important. You could say roughly it was about a third, a little bit more. So if you want to be super charitable, you could say 40% of the studies replicated. That might be a little on the high side, but whatever. There are some methodological concerns with those replication attempts. For instance, some of the studies, they changed substantial features of how the study was conducted. So maybe the original study was a field study, but the attempted replication was done online. So I don't know the exact details of this, but some people have pointed out, both the people whose studies failed to replicate and other people have pointed out some concerns with some of like it wasn't perfect, these attempts at replicating, although overall it looks like they did quite a fantastic job of all of this. Anyway, so let's say we're just going to be charitable and say 40%. Of course, it's going to vary by journal and sub-discipline and that sort of thing. 40%. Okay, so 40% of studies replicate. Out of those, how many are going to have non-negligible effect sizes? So the effect size, like the strength of the phenomena that we find, isn't so small that nobody cares. Let's say it's half of them. Okay, so now we're down to 20% of studies have non-negligible effects that replicate. Okay, and then out of those, and then we could say what's the proportion of studies that are fabricated? Well, so you are going to get some problems here because fabricated studies are much more likely to have positive results. although they're also not likely to replicate. So you're going to have huge problems with trying to factor this in. But let's say we're oversimplify this. Out of those, let's say 10%, let's say whatever, let's just ignore fabrication because that's hard to estimate anyway, and it's probably fairly small. So, okay, so we got 20%. How many of those the study used valid measures? Let's say a quarter of those. So now we're down to 5% because I have huge problems with measurement. I think a lot of studies don't have valid measures. Let's say you say, Lance, you're being just too pessimistic. Let's say it's half. Okay, we're down to 10%, right? So we did 40, 20, 10. So we're down to 10% of studies have valid measures, they replicate, and they find non-negligible effects. And then we could say, well, what proportion of those have been correctly interpreted by researchers? And so when they say this is the effect that we found, they're accurately characterizing it. Let's say it's half of those. Let's just simplify it. Well, then you got 5% of studies. So 5% of studies on this very, very crude back of the envelope estimate are interpreted correctly, use valid measures, are replicable, and have non-negligible effects. That's a very, very, very small number. And we're not even adding other sort of factors and variables here. We're not factoring in the narrowness and generalizability of the studies. What if there's going to be massive measurement and variance, and what you're really finding is an effect that only occurs in this particular subpopulation, and you wouldn't find the same effect in another population, or the effect size would be very different in another population. You're going to have absolutely massive problems. Social psychology and psychology in general is right now a methodological mess. It's currently undergoing this replication crisis. Studies have very low replication rates. But I also think that there's a measurement and validity crisis. I think that very little effort is put into validating measures and ensuring that those measures remain valid across translations and reuse in new populations and that sort of thing. So, Perspective made this comment about psychology being, whatever, like having huge problems. I'm in the thick of it with identifying and commenting on those problems. Like I go out of my way to identify and talk about them. And although I think that psychology can rebound from discovering, identifying, and addressing these problems, I think it's going to require an extraordinary amount of work. And I don't know that the field has really grappled with that, has really looked at the problems straight on and said, wow, we have a ton of work to do. I think a lot of people want to move past even just the replication crisis, and they're not even aware, or at least, it might be that they're aware of concerns like mine, because I'm not the only person that's raised concerns about validity and measurement, but they don't think they're as big of a problem as me. I do know that when, for instance, Yarkoni published that paper, The Generalizability Crisis, awesome paper, you should check it out. Some of the pushback, just people were like, I don't think there is a generalizability crisis. So there's been some kind of pushback like that. So not everybody is going to agree. And some of them are methodologists and have much deeper foundations in statistics, and they're going to know better than me. And their critiques might even be sort of above my pay grade. So it could be that there's substantial room for disagreement here. And some people are going to be a lot less pessimistic than me. There's probably people that are quite a bit more pessimistic. So I think if you were looking at percentiles, with the bottom, like the bottom decile being the sort of like the most optimistic, like the people least concerned, and then the top decile being the most concerned, I would be at like a 9, probably like a 9 out of 10. I don't know why I framed it in those terms, but like I would be like in what would that be? Like the 87% or something, something like that. All right. So anyway, so yeah, I would like to have that discussion. I don't know why I was so reluctant. I don't know. I should get over it and just have a talk. So we should do that. Cool. That was a while ago. Okay, let me catch up. It was 20 minutes. Jeez. All right. I hate the mudslinging, but I do have serious disagreements. I'd rather just work through them constructively if we can. That would be great. All right. I'm looking through the comments just to get caught up. Sorry for that taking a while. All right. Thank you for the comments. We fight for the kind words, Meat Machine. Joe is here with the truth suppression levels have surpassed 9,000. I thought they surpassed 9,000 a while ago. So you gotta upgrade, passing 9,000. I think that thing that's used to read people's power levels broke a while ago. And, I'm dropping spirit bombs on people. All right. All right. Lots of other sort of random comments. All right. Sorry, just trying to get caught up on these. Okay, so Jesus is really like 5%. For someone that said 5%, I was giving you a sort of back of the envelope estimate for a sort of rough estimate of the number of sort of, I guess you could say, substantive and correctly interpreted findings in social psychology. Those numbers were completely made up. I so don't take it to be it's really 5%. No, I don't know what the actual number is. It might actually be lower than that. When I've sat down and thought about the sort of Drake equation version for psychology before. You know what? I should really maybe reach out to some methodologists and psychologists and see if they would be interested in putting something together like that, because they would just do so much of a better job than me if this idea is worth pursuing, of like trying to create a psychology Drake equation. They would just do a much better job than me. I don't have enough knowledge of the ins and outs of all the technical stuff to really make an estimate like that. But I think the number would be low. So already, if you just take studies that replicate, you're already going to get rid of probably half to 2/3. I would suspect it's like 70% don't replicate, 60, 70%. And then out of that, so let's say you drop down to 30%. Because I think the number is actually probably closer to that, to 30%. And then, I mean, I think it would be really, really generous to say half the measures are valid. So, I mean, 15% would be like, to me, pretty optimistic. So yeah, I think the number of like significant, oh, and I didn't even add in the non-negligible calculation, where the effect size is detectable, but it's really, really minimal. So when you add those numbers up, yeah. So, like even if you do, there's big problems with meta-analyses and all this other stuff, but a lot of these effects, like the nudge effects and stuff in JDN, even if the effects are real, they might be so small, like they account for 1% of the variance or something like that. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not practically relevant, because if a policy that you implement is really easy to do, 1% can add up and accumulate over time for pretty small things. Like, imagine if you could reduce the overall mortality rate from a disease by 1% for like a really high mortality rate, that could be thousands of lives. That's not nothing. So, I mean, it could be practically significant, but this has to be handled case by case. And, part of the interesting thing about that is that it's not purely quantitative, whether, 1% difference or something like that matters. There's going to be these normative questions that are going to be figuring into a lot of the sort of application of psychological findings. All right. What might be even worse, that 5% might be stuff that you could learn through casual observation, so you aren't doing better than the average Joe. Yeah. Yeah, that is somewhat concerning. There's this wonderful, wonderful paper by Rosin. I think it's called Some Lessons from Solomon Asch. That paper is so good. I am going to look that up and really strongly recommend this to people. And then I really got to get to the halfway fallacy stuff. Give me a second. All right. I posted it here, and you can see here, Social Psychology and Science, similar lessons from Solomon Asch. So the paper's a little over 20 years old. It's an absolutely wonderful paper. I very strongly recommend checking that out if you like psychology. Or if you hate psychology, also check it out. So what Rosin talks about in that paper is how psychology this is a very crude reading on it, but psychology basically was envious of the hard sciences, like the success of physics and chemistry and all that stuff. So, psychology kind of emerged in the late 1800s as a formal discipline. And this was right around the time, of Einstein and the whole overturning Newton and all that stuff. Planes getting created, nuclear power, like just massive, just a total revolution in the STEM fields. A lot of, statistics started emerging in the 20th century too. So just all kinds of stuff, genetics. So just big deals. And those sciences at that point were, in a certain sense, you could think of them as kind of mature sciences. A lot of the observational work had been done or had been gathered for, in some cases, decades, if not centuries of observational work. And what Rosin does is frames this sort of historical narrative of how psychologists kind of, you can move from observational research to correlational research to the sort of the quote unquote gold standard of scientific research, which is the experiment, where you're actually manipulating variables and looking for causal effects. Now, the thing is, that might be thought of as the gold standard, but there's a kind of epistemic layer cake. And of course, you don't stop doing observational and correlational research once you mature enough to do experiments. All of these types of research play an integral role in most sciences, and they're important, and you need them to constantly be dynamically feeding into one another. You do an experiment, it refines your theory. You might form a new form a hypothesis, go out, make an observation. You do the observations, you identify some relationships in the natural world, some correlations, then you conduct an experiment. So they all need to interact with one another. But psychologists sort of just leaped straight into the experiments because that's the cool stuff. That's the respected, high status, prestigious stuff. And psychology never really got itself on quite as firm of a foundation of just gathering lots of descriptive data and then observational research. Rosin makes a few other really good points in the paper, but that for me is one of the key ones, which is I think psychologists got way too caught up in conducting experiments in this sort of theoretically ungrounded way and didn't do enough of the observational groundwork that they should have done. And this is part of the reason why I am very strongly in favor of grounding psychological research in observation and more bottom-up types research rather than devising a theory or a construct and then trying to put people in boxes. Hey, are you an A or a B? Do you endorse X or do you endorse Y? Is to go look at what people are doing. Observational research, descriptive research, and you get a whole bunch of that. And then once you have a bunch of that, you start sorting through it. And then you look at what you're doing there. The comparison I like to make is to Charles Darwin and how Darwin went about forming the theory of evolution by natural selection. It was just decades of just really intense observational research. That isn't to say that Darwin didn't do experiments and test things out, but there was just lots of very careful observation. And I think psychology would have been in a much better place if it had been more patient as a field and people had spent more time doing that observational research. The biggest thing is that psychology, I think, from the very outset should have been much more connected to understanding that humans are a cultural species and that culture can never be forgotten when studying human behavior. I mean, culture even influences visual perception. And this distancing of social psychology from a sort of acute awareness of the role of culture in shaping how we think and how we act has been absolutely catastrophic for the field. So if you look at, because I constantly bring this up, that paper, The Weirdest People in the World by Henrik Heine and Noren Zion, just go check it out, because most of the research is done on and by people from a culturally idiosyncratic and parochial part of the world. It's mostly in the United States and it's mostly college students. And that's US college students in the United States are not representative of the way everybody everywhere thinks. So that gets a bit silly. Okay. I'm not going to get into that. Let me finish up the last comments. I'll get into the halfway fallacy. And then are the people that wanted to talk to me here? Can you let me know if you're here? So I'll know how fast to go. All right. It looks like some people are discussing things with themselves. I got another greeting. Hey, how's it going? This is an excellent question. Do you lean towards any specific theory of truth? No. So I just got out of a PhD in psychology. I spent years and years and years reading psychology. I got really into validity and all that stuff. And only after the last couple of years, towards the end of finishing up the dissertation and all that stuff, did I sort of stumble into how many of my views seem to converge on a lot of the criticisms that Wittgenstein levels against much of philosophy, and that classical pragmatists, especially the works of James and Schiller, seem to level against much of the methods of philosophy. In particular, there's a sort of uncanny resemblance between a lot of the things I say and a lot of the things Schiller said in work that is, 100 years ago, and before even the sort of modern linguistic turn really transformed fundamentally the nature of contemporary philosophy. A lot of the philosophy I'm dealing with is stuff that really, I don't think started maturing until the 50s or 60s. I don't know. I'm not a historian of philosophy, but most of the stuff I'm dealing with is actually 1980s onwards, like in fact, almost all of it. So to see Schiller make these sort of uncannily prescient remarks about, the state of philosophy. They just look like stuff that I would be like, I wish I said that. That seems right. So it's very likely that I would land on some sort of pragmatic conception of truth, but it's just not stuff I've had the time or even the opportunity yet, given my other obligations of what I've been reading to look into. So I would say provisionally, every time I see the pragmatist stuff, I'm like, that looks real good to me. That looks real promising. But I haven't dug into it enough to know. So I can't be sure yet. So we'll see. So I would say right now, currently, I don't endorse any particular theory of truth. I have been discussing correspondence theory with a person that's very critical of it. And I'm still kind of in this state of flux with trying to understand what exactly the concerns are with correspondence approaches. Oh, right. Okay, awesome. Okay, lots of people are up for a chat, but I have to talk about this halfway fallacy thing. Otherwise, it's just going to be super misleading. So for those who are here, if you could stick around, I'm going to go through this. So, all right. Let me get into the halfway fallacy because I spent a half hour on other stuff, but here's the half. All right. So I'll just read it because that's a pretty straightforward way. Sometimes, writing, I put a little more thought into it than if I just try to extemporaneously blather about it. So just to set the stage for this was in part a response to and commentary on some of the remarks made on the blog Bentham's Bulldog. And that's by Matthew, who I've spoken to. I've been on Matthew's channel before. So Matthew is a proponent of moral realism, and that'll give you a little bit of context. But this is a response to another blog post. And if you follow my blog post, you'll see the other blog post. But let me get into it. All right. Part 1, the halfway fallacy. Some time ago, Bentham's Bulldog, which I abbreviate as BB, presented the following argument in this blog post. Suppose we're about to discover whether moral realism is true. Someone offers you a bet. If it's true, they get $1. If it's true, they get $1. If it's false, you get $10,000. Should you take the bet? No. Here's why. If moral realism is true, then winning the bet actually makes you better off. You have a genuine reason to not, there's a typo, I think, but take the bet. So you have a genuine reason to not take the bet. You just lose $1. But if anti-realism is true, you are not made better off. Nothing matters. And taking the bet doesn't make you better off. You only have genuine reason in one case. So what you could see here, and this is I'm stopping a bit to just comment on this, is that, okay, so the situation is you've got this bet, right? And so the bet is, okay, we could find out whether moral realism is true, and someone's going to make you a bet. If moral realism is true, you'll get $1. But if it's false, you'll get $10,000. And then the question is, should you take that bet? And on BB's view here, the idea is no, because if moral realism is true, you actually would be better off. But if moral realism isn't true, if some type of moral anti-realism is true, you're not actually made better off. So you have no reason. Getting $10,000 wouldn't make you better off if moral realism were not true. Because if moral anti-realism is true, nothing matters at all. And so getting $10,000 couldn't be better. You wouldn't be made better off. So taking the bet couldn't make you better off. In other words, you can't really be better off if moral anti-realism is true. And so there's no reason to take bets that might, reveal that anti-realism is true. So here's what I say about that. This argument is an excellent demonstration of what I call the halfway fallacy. I use the term fallacy here loosely since it's more of a presumption others are free to contest, a kind of philosophical oversight. The halfway fallacy occurs when one argues that a particular position, contrary to their own, has one or more flaws or undesirable characteristics, but those flaws or undesirable characteristics are only applicable to the position if some set of claims you believe are true are in fact true, but you haven't argued for, and those objections are directed are free to reject. In other words, the problem occurs when one holds certain presuppositions that those who hold the view are free to reject. And it might also be the case that they aren't merely free to reject the presuppositions, but they do in fact reject them. And it may even be that rejecting the presuppositions is a natural and synergistic feature of the contrary view. One might also call this the fallacy of unshared presumption. The central problem with this form of reasoning is that an argument for or against some position is based on considering the implication of someone holding one or more views contrary to one's own, but critically not considering that they reject certain other presuppositions you hold. Of course, any objection you raise against a particular position is likely to be predicated on various presuppositions that someone else might reject. So one might insist every argument has this feature. To a certain extent, that is true. Yet the presuppositions behind one's position will often be more or less a matter of dispute between yourself and one's interlocutors. It is one thing to presuppose the earth is round when arguing with someone about the geographic location of a particular city. It is quite another to presuppose the Christian God exists when arguing with an atheist. The halfway fallacy isn't so much an inferential mistake, then, but a way of framing disputes as though one has a strong argument when one really doesn't, often because the argument criticizes some view in virtue of that view's implications, given some set of presuppositions that proponents of that view are likely to reject, or that they could readily reject in virtue of approaching the philosophical dispute in question from a fundamentally different perspective, often one closely tied to the views downstream of that perspective. So in case that is a bit hard to follow, I'm going to then in the next section give an example of this. Perhaps the best way to illustrate what I have in mind is an example. Part 2, sci-fi lovers and sci-fi haters. Suppose you think the following: science fiction movies are the only good movies. Now imagine you encounter someone who says, I don't like science fiction movies. The shock, the horror, what mangled mind could fail to appreciate 2001: A Space Odyssey? Given your views, you could then conclude, this person does not like any good movies. After all, the following propositions are true. 1, this person does not like science fiction movies. 2, science fiction movies are the only good movies. It follows then that 3, this person does not like any good movies. Now, it would be one thing for you to judge that this person does not like any movies that you consider good movies. But imagine that you insisted to this person that given their views, that they are committed to the view that they don't like any good movies. So the sci-fi lover says, given that the only good movies are science fiction movies, if you don't like any science fiction movies, then you don't like any good movies. How do you expect this person to react? Here's one way they could respond. The sci-fi hater could say, yes, I concede that it is an implication of my view. Given that the only good movies are science fiction movies, then since I don't like any science fiction movies, then clearly I don't like any good movies. Do you think that's how most people would respond? I suspect not. This would be a weird and implausible response. Instead, they'd be much more likely to respond like this. The sci-fi hater again. Sure, I don't like any science fiction movies, but I think there are good movies that aren't science fiction movies. I like movies in a variety of different genres, documentaries, dramas, comedies, and so on. I just don't like science fiction movies. This is a bit more formal than how a person might actually respond, but it conveys the typical reaction someone would actually have. And what does this convey? 1, they don't like science fiction movies. 2, they like various non-science fiction movies. 3, they don't think science fiction movies are the only good movies. And 4, they think there are good movies other than science fiction movies. In other words, they reject 2 above, namely that science fiction movies are the only good movies. As such, they do not have to grant that they don't like any good movies for the simple reason that they also reject the sci-fi lover's presumption that science fiction movies are the only good movies. The halfway fallacy can be illustrated in this example by considering what the person who likes science fiction is presuming. They grant that the other person does not like science fiction movies. And as an aside, of course, that person does too. The person is saying, yeah, I don't like science fiction movies. However, they continue to presume that only science fiction movies are good movies. Yet the person who doesn't like science fiction movies also disagrees with this latter claim. That is, the science fiction hater does not think that science fiction movies are the only good movies. So this person, the science fiction hater, is not committed to the view that they do not like any good movies because they don't share the sci-fi lover's belief that only science fiction movies are good movies. It would be absurd for the science fiction lover to insist that this person really is committed on their own view to agree that they don't like any good movies. The science fiction lover seems to have only gone halfway in considering the perspective of a person who doesn't like science fiction movies. They recognize that this person doesn't like science fiction movies, but haven't seemed to appreciate that this person disagrees with them about a further fact that the only good movies are science fiction movies. This is the thing that the science fiction hater also disagrees with. They think, look, I don't like science fiction movies, but I also don't think they're the only good movies. If they were to have a dispute, the dispute could very well center on whether science fiction movies are the only good movies. It would be inappropriate to begin an inquiry under the presumption that it is simply a fact that only science fiction movies are good movies. That is one of the things that the science fiction hater denies. The next section is supernatural magic and natural illusions. So let's apply the same reasoning to BB's argument. According to BB, you shouldn't take the bet because if realism is true, winning the bet actually, quote, actually makes you better off. While if anti-realism is true, you would not be better off even if you won $10,000. Why? Because if anti-realism is true, then, quote, nothing matters. According to BB, you only have a genuine reason if realism is true. There are multiple problems here. One is the use of deceptive modifiers, which I have discussed at length in an earlier post. And you should check that post out called The Fake Cheese Fallacy, where I discuss deceptive modifiers. Note the use of the term actually and genuine. Both of these terms are deceptive modifiers. In both cases, the presumption is that you can only be better off, that things can only matter, and that you can only have reasons to do things if realism is true. The presumption behind these terms is that the only sense in which any of these notions obtains is in some respect that just constitutes the realist conception of better off, mattering, and reasons. In other words, if BB just means in a realist sense, then it is misleading and presumptuous to use this terminology. Those of us who deny that moral realism is true are not obliged to grant that only the realist conception of being better off, mattering, and reasons are actual or genuine. Indeed, this is one of the very things I dispute. For comparison, suppose two people are watching a magician perform magic on a stage. They appear to be able to make objects disappear, saw people in half, read people's minds, and so on. We can propose at least two possible explanations for these demonstrations. One, they can perform supernatural magic, or two, they can perform natural illusions. Dennett relates an account from Lee Siegel. I'm writing a book on magic, I explain, and I'm asked, real magic? By real magic, people mean miracles, thaumaturgical acts, and supernatural powers. No, I answer, conjuring tricks, not real magic. Real magic, in other words, refers to the magic that is not real, while the magic that is real, that can actually be done, is not real magic. And that's quoted page 425 in an article from Dennett. Siegel's remark highlights an interesting ambiguity in the use of the term real. Magic could be said to be real in at least two ways. Real in the sense of being supernatural, and real in the sense of it actually occurring in the real world. Supernatural magic is real in the sense of A, but not in the sense of B. That is, insofar as one's notion of real magic is magic that isn't reducible to some prestidigitation, sleight of hand, or mentalism that could be described in mundane everyday terms, then if a street performer is merely doing the latter, they're not doing, quote, real magic. If, on the other hand, real magic refers to the actual sort of thing people can do and that does occur in the real world, then a stage performer pulling off tricks and illusions is doing real magic in that respect. When BB uses terms like actually and genuine, these terms are used in a way that is ambiguous between two analogous readings only with respect to realism. We have two readings of actual mattering or genuine reasons, actual or genuine in the sense of being stance independent, or in some way that's only entailed on a stance independent view, or actual or genuine in the sense of accurately describing what the world is actually like. And I'd added that second part to the first of the two. I believe BB's marks derive much of their persuasive force from exploiting this unresolved ambiguity. While BB's position only makes sense if BB has A in mind, I think BB's remarks take advantage of the ambiguity generated by the use of terms like, quote, genuine, to give the misleading impression that to reject BB's position is to accept that one could not be better off, that nothing could matter, and that one could have no reasons in the sense of B as well, as in not in the actual world. Yet the anti-realist would, I should say could, some anti-realists, Strumer might even agree with some of the positions that realists take on some things. And I think generally this might be fairly common for some error theorists. Anyway, yet the anti-realist would, or I should say could, deny B. Anti-realists do not accept that the realist characterization of mattering, reasons, etc. describe what the world is actually like. That's the very thing they deny. To sharpen the analogy, imagine you have a friend who believes stage performers do supernatural magic. If you deny this and maintain instead that they perform natural illusions, what follows from this? Does it follow that you don't believe they're doing anything at all? After all, if real means occurring in the real world, then if you deny that the magician is performing real magic, then aren't you denying that they're doing anything that's occurring in the real world? In other words, you see a stage performer, they appear to saw a person in half. Your friend says they're doing real magic. They're casting spells. They're using supernatural powers. And you go, no, they're not. Does that mean you think there is no magician, there is no stage, no one appears to be getting saw, nothing's happening? No, it means you think it's not the case that what you're both agreeing you're observing is the result of supernatural forces. It doesn't mean you think nothing is real. And so you could see that ambiguity emerging from this. Anyway, to continue, that would be absurd. You and the person who believes magicians are doing supernatural magic can both see the magician performing the tricks. You can see them pull the rabbit from a hat. You can see them provide a detailed biographical information about an apparent stranger. You can see them walk off the stage on the left, only to appear seconds later on the right side of the stage. If you deny they're doing real magic, then you must be a complete idiot. How could you possibly deny what you can see with your own eyes? Of course, to deny they're doing real magic from the perspective of someone who thinks they're doing natural illusions isn't to deny what they see with their own eyes. It's to deny the supernaturalist's interpretation of it. Just the same, an anti-realist isn't limited to only rejecting that things matter or that one can have reasons or be better off in the sense supposed by Beebe or other moral realists, i.e. some stance-dependent way or a way that's only true if realism is true. They can also deny that this is the only sense in which things can or do matter. In other words, they can just reject Beebe's claim, like only if realism is true does anything genuinely or really matter. I could just say, no, I disagree. I have my own account of what genuine and real mattering is, and it's the anti-realist conception. And so it's not just that I deny realism. I also deny that only the realist conception of genuine or real mattering is like the only possible things really or genuinely mattering. All right. And I think this is the last section. So we're coming up on the end here. Section 4, trivial arguments and normative entanglement. Moral anti-realists are, in other words, entitled to present alternative accounts of what the actual world is like. And this includes offering alternative accounts of ways in which one can be better off, or ways in which things can matter, or ways in which things, I think I'm missing something here, can be meaningfully said to have reasons. We don't have to accept the realist account of these concepts. And when the realist uses these terms, the anti-realist does not have to accept that the realist construal of these terms is the only accurate or possible way to construe those terms. What Beebe and philosophers more generally ought to do is, when employing such terms, make their implicit presuppositions explicit and then see how their arguments look. In this case, actual or genuine, once disambiguated, in the only way that would allow Beebe's argument to work, since if these terms are consistent with anti-realism, then Beebe's claims wouldn't be true, one would have to swap them out for something like in a realist sense or stance independently. In other words, Beebe could have said this when responding to whether you should take the bet. So we go back to Beebe's description of the bet, and then we say, should you take the bet? And then here would be the sort of reconstruction. Now, Beebe might object to this reconstruction. I'm totally fine with that. I could offer one where instead of stance independently, we mean in a way that's only consistent with or true if realism is true. So you could substitute it in that way, and I think it would still go through. The bottom line is the sense in which things would have to be better off only if realism is true could only be true if it's entailed by realism being true. So you can't get around the fact that if things only genuinely matter if realism is true, then whatever you mean by genuine, things can only matter in that sense if realism is true. So that's an unavoidable feature. Anyway, here would be that reply. No, here's why. In other words, should you take that bet? No, here's why. If moral realism is true, then winning the bet makes you stance independently better off. You have a stance independent reason to not take the bet. You'd just lose $1. But if anti-realism is true, you are not made stance independently better off. Nothing stance independently matters, and taking the bet doesn't make you stance independently better off. You only have stance independent reasons in one case. Now notice, once you clarify what's meant there, it's completely trivial. Anti-realism just is the view that there are no stance independent moral facts. So of course you don't have, of course it's true that you only have stance independent reasons if realism is true. An anti-realist can just say, well, of course that's true, and I readily grant, if anti-realism is true, I don't have stance independent reasons. I can't be stance independently better off. Nothing stance independently matters. Taking a bet can't make me stance independently better off. That's completely trivial. It's just a restatement of the view, you know? So, I mean, you could even swap it out for someone saying something like, look, the only correct account that's possible of moral commands or moral rules is if they're issued by God, if they're God's commands. And so to say that a moral rule just is a commandment from God, well, if you're an atheist, then, you can't think that there are any moral rules. You can't think there's a rule against murder. You can't think there's a rule against stealing. But all that amounts to is saying, if you don't believe in God, then you don't think it's the case that God commands people not to murder and God commands people not to steal. It's completely trivial. And so I actually think that when you unpack Beebe's bet here, the bet bakes in a presupposition that, when made explicit, trivializes the what's being asserted. And that's, in fact, exactly what I said. I said that without even reading what I subsequently said. So let me wrap up this post. Once the argument is disambiguated, the argument becomes trivial. Moral realism, or more accurately, normative realism, just is the view that there are stance-independent normative facts, such that one can be stance-independently better off. One can have stance-independent reasons. Things can be stance-independent. Things can stance-independently matter, and so on. Normative anti-realism, conversely, is the view that there are no stance-independent normative facts. So we could rewrite this again to say, no, here's why. If the correct account of normativity is that normative considerations are stance-independent, then winning the bet makes you stance-independently better off. You have a stance-independent reason to not take the bet, you just lose $1. But if there are no stance-independent normative facts, you are not made stance-independently better off. Nothing stance-independently matters. And taking the bet doesn't make you stance-independently better off. You only have stance-independent reasons in one case. This clarification further reinforces how trivial the claim is. It is nothing more than a statement of the implications of normative realism and anti-realism, respectively, with some terminological facades to give it a bit of rhetorical punch. A great deal of arguments in analytic philosophy are trivial in this respect. The more I have examined these arguments, the more they appear to rely on a kind of terminological legerdemain. One presupposes or stipulates that some familiar term like genuine carries the philosophical presuppositions. Then one appends genuine to some claim they expect others to be hard-pressed to deny, not because they look stupid or evil if they deny your philosophical position, but because the term in question has ordinary colloquial usages that, were one to deny them, would make you look stupid and evil. If someone said they don't think it's genuinely wrong to torture babies for fun, they'd look evil. Even if someone said they don't think it stands independently wrong to torture babies for fun, they might still look evil. Yet this is likely due to normative entanglement and to Bayesian considerations, as in someone who says it is stance independently wrong affirms it is wrong full stop, whereas someone who denies it is stance independently wrong doesn't, and thus one would have to update from such a response that this person has given some evidence that they don't think it's wrong in any respect. Now, suppose someone said they don't think it's magically wrong to torture babies for fun. Now, perhaps some of the stink is starting to rub off the normative element of the remark, i.e., quote, wrong. An audience might think, okay, well, they don't think it's magically wrong, but do they think it's wrong in some non-magical way? Finally, a person could confirm their normative stance towards the issue alongside rejecting realism, and most of the stink is likely to go away. In other words, they could say, look, I don't think it stands independently wrong, but of course I think it's morally wrong. I find it repugnant and unacceptable and would do everything in my power to oppose it. It's much less clear this person is evil compared to someone who simply said they don't think baby torture is genuinely wrong. Section 5, conclusion. Beebe's wager is not a very convincing one. Beebe seems to be imagining that if someone were considering the wager, that their decisions would be based on whether something would make them better off in a realist sense, and that if anti-realism is true, they have no reason in a realist sense to favor having $10,000 because nothing matters in a realist sense. If someone trying to decide whether to take a bet only thought things could matter or that they could have reasons to do things in a realist sense, then perhaps they'd conclude that they shouldn't take the bet. But this observation strikes me as trivial, and it also seems quite strange. Suppose normative realism really were false. Beebe's account on this wager suggests that one's decisions about what to do would become irrelevant. It wouldn't matter if you took the bet or not. Nothing would matter. If this generalizes, it wouldn't matter if you suffered. It wouldn't matter if you tortured people. It wouldn't matter what you ate. You'd have no more reason to eat food you like than to drink poison. I suspect this appraisal of the situation creates a potentially motivated asymmetry. The stakes for a realist who thinks this way are very high. If they're wrong about realism, they lose everything, literally everything. Nothing matters. It wouldn't matter what they did. Love is nothing. Happiness is nothing. Joy is nothing. Kindness is nothing. Reality is just a nihilistic facade. Anti-realists don't face nearly as great an incentive to resist moral realism, however. Perhaps this asymmetry matters. Perhaps it prompts a greater degree of motivated reasoning on the part of moral realists than anti-realist experience, since the costs for them are effectively infinite, while the costs to me, anti-realists, are comparatively much lower. The main cost for me would be, I suppose, embarrassment and guilt over pushing anti-realism for so long. I'd like to propose this as one minor point of evidence against moral realism. Call it the asymmetric motivation hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, moral realists are subject to a greater potential biasing influence when evaluating arguments for and against realist and anti-realist positions compared to anti-realists. All else being equal, this provides some minor evidence against the plausibility of moral realism in that its proponents are more vulnerable, again, all else being equal, to motivated reasoning than anti-realists. All right, that was kind of a long one, but I thought it was worth going through. I really think that this halfway fallacy issue is a big deal. I think it's an important problem, and I think it's really at the foundation of a lot of the sort of what I take to be linguistic strangeness going on, because I don't think a lot of this is intentional or explicit, but I think there's a lot of linguistic trickery going on that's very much unintentional. I think analytic philosophers are trained into it. And so I think that's a serious problem. All right, let me wrap up there, and then let me post the link now. And I'm going to have to take a very quick break while those who are interested still, if you're still around, I'm very sorry that took me an hour instead of a half hour. I say a lot of stuff. I'm trying to get this pinned, and it's being kind of annoying to do it. There we go. Replace the pin message. So the StreamYard link for joining me is up now. You'll have to wait in the lobby while I take a quick break if you're ready to jump in. All of the people that expressed an interest in coming in, you're welcome to join me in the lobby, and I'll add you in a minute. Let me just get through the comments. So where did I start? I started at about 5:30, so about a half hour ago. All right. So several other people up for a chat. I don't know if PKD is still here. I'm really sorry that took a half hour longer. I think I mentioned to you that it might take a little longer, but not as long as it did. So just double of the times I say things are, and that might be more accurate. Okay, so you might be joining. Great. Okay. Yeah, I've got another hour and 15 or so plenty of time to talk for quite a bit. All right. Let's see. Oh, yeah. If I don't know, but if someone sees the point where the halfway fallacy started, feel free to let me know, and then I could add a timestamp for it. I could even pen it or something. Maybe I should clip it out and make it its own video. Oh, right. Let's see what else. This is funny, so I'll put it up. Why the duck would I care about a genuine reason I want my $10,000? That's my reaction to this. So we could get into that more another time. I think that there's a lot to say about that, but I just want to get my quick break in. Grab a glass of water. I'm going to finish this one in a second and get some more. I talked a lot, so I'm going to need some more water and take a quick break. All right. I'm not seeing a whole lot of other. It looks like a lot of people talk to each other or saying lots of stuff. Meat Machine, you are a comment machine. That's a lot of comments. All right. Let's see. Yeah, I think there's not a whole lot else to add there other than someone saying how you're doing. Doing good. I'm just going to need a break in a moment. And then this last comment here, this happens a lot in theistic apologetics as well. A weird chimera of the theist and the atheist view gets argued against as though the atheistic view is argued against. Yeah, it's kind of a weird chimera. I agree with that. Cool. Okay, let me bring people into the stream. And behave yourselves, because I'm going to take a quick break. So you could introduce yourselves. You could start commenting on stuff, and I'll be gone for probably about 2 minutes. All right, I am adding people. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And I will be off camera for about 2 minutes.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hey. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I guess your audio is working.
Yeah, your audio too. So we wait for Lance, or do you want to start discussing moral realism?
I mean, I wouldn't really know where to start without Lance. Like, there was a specific point I wanted to get to with him, but I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there is not much to say really. Moral realism is either trivial, false, or unintelligible. Do you guys agree with that?
I'm okay. So my position is basically I actually agree with a lot of Lance's claims, but I still, in some ways, feel more sympathetic toward moral realism because it feels like moral realism is at least trying to ground normative ethics.
Guys, sorry for interrupting, but is the audio echoing for anybody else, or is it just me?
It's fine for me.
It's fine for me too, yeah.
It's fine for you. Okay, well, I guess I'll go grab a headset because I guess that's my problem then.
Yeah, it's gotta work better with headphones. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, we'll see how far we'll be able to go for it with Lance.
Your audio is really quiet. Is it quiet only for me?
Oh, my audio is quiet.
Yeah, I think so. Or it could be a problem on my end. Let me put headset.
God.
Wait, so is it echoing for you too, or what? What are you discussing now?
Yeah, we
No.
were just discussing the audio. I think his audio is a little bit quiet while we wait for Lance.
Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to make my audio any louder.
Okay, I'm gonna do another test. 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
I am back,
Okay.
and everyone is sounding fine to me. So I thought it was fun. I'd taken a break, and everyone's like troubleshooting their audio issues. This is the first time I've had 4 people in here, so it's a lot of people. Yeah, you all are welcome to get started. You could. Do you have questions for me? I'd really like if people talk to one another. You know, maybe I brought too many people on. I don't know. Let's let the chaos ensue.
I don't do well in chaos. I'm sort of afraid that like.
Yeah, I
Oh,
just
zombie.
figured out why it echoes because I have the stream in a
Yeah, I was
different
gonna say
tab on.
that. Just
Yeah.
mute the stream. Okay. Well, sorry if you are, you know, not wanting to get into chaos. We'll try to keep it chill. Do you want to start then?
If that's okay with everyone, just
Yeah.
because I don't know how long
I'm
I
in
can
charge, so it's
stay up.
you get to start.
Yeah. Sorry, everyone. I'll try to be quick, and if we have to come back to it later, that's totally fine. Yeah. So my point. I mean, so I kind of introduced the issue a little bit last week, but my question is basically sort of how do you go about like grounding normative ethical discourse within an anti-realist framework? And I think there are ways to do it. I'm kind of trying to work on it myself in some ways, but I'd like to hear sort of if that's
Through
a problem.
force, I guess?
I'm,
Like
I'm talking.
police?
I'm talking to Lance. I'm really sorry, but
Oh, okay, sorry.
I've been trying to have this conversation with
Yeah,
Lance.
this has been a couple weeks, so let me
Okay,
address
and
this, and then we'll get to it.
sorry. Sorry
No
for
worries.
No, it's
jumping
all
in.
good. It's just there's a bottleneck because if people have been wanting to talk to me, and I
Yeah,
wasn't live
sure.
streaming. Okay, so I guess can you tell me a bit more about what you mean by grounding normative ethics?
Well, so basically, as I was starting to say last week, we have these language games, right? And there are sort of moves that we make within this language game. So roughly, like when we have a moral disagreement, say I say abortion is okay, and someone else says abortion is wrong or something. We we have some ways of at least trying to resolve, or if not resolve, at least clarify this disagreement and move forward in some way with it, right? And if we say, well, if we say there are no moral facts, then the discussion ends there, right? No, it's not wrong. No, it's not permissible. There is just no fact of the matter. So we just end it here. If we're subjectivists, we can say, well, okay, you think it's wrong. I think it's okay. We just agree to disagree, and it doesn't seem like we can go any further with it. So that all seems very unsatisfying to me, because I think there's value in actually like working through these kinds of disagreements, and I think we have some ways of working through these disagreements that are useful and valuable. And the only sort of metaethical theory that I could possibly endorse is one that like takes into account the fact that like when you have this kind of disagreement on abortion, we can actually, get into the substance of sort of, okay, well, by virtue of what do you think it's wrong, and by virtue of what do I think it's okay,
Mhm.
and and I think there are many ways to construct such a standard, and I agree. There's no like, I certainly don't think there are stance independent moral facts, because I don't really think there are stance independent facts at all, to be honest. But that being the case, we can still like build some kind of intersubjective framework through which the question is abortion wrong or is abortion okay has a determinate answer, or at least we tentatively sort of accept that there is a determinate answer, and we try to find it in some way.
What?
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, so I think first a distinction, which is that anti-realists are just going to take a variety of views on. First they're going to agree there are no stance-independent moral facts, and then they might have different perspectives on why that is. Often that's going to be a semantic thesis about the meaning of moral claims, on cognitivism, error theory, that sort of thing. So they're going to have that, but that itself doesn't, anti-realists are then confronted with this what next problem, which is, okay, well, if there are no stance independent moral facts, now what do you do? Now, what you suggested to, what you alluded to is exactly where I would want to go with things. And the analogy that I make is to something like diplomacy or negotiation. So you could think of something like haggling over the price of a product. I go to a store, I want to pay a certain amount for a product. The person selling the product, they want to optimize for their interests, which is as much money as possible for the product. I want to optimize for my interests, which is as little money as possible. There's no fact of the matter about the price of the product. We could get into price realism at some point, but there's no fact of the matter about what the correct price is. There's just the price we would both mutually be like. There's going to be a big zone where I would accept that price and they won't. So $0. I'll take it for $0. I'll take it for $1. Let's say it's a hat that, a hat might be worth what, $10, $15. I would buy it for $1 to $9, but they're not going to take it. They might say, look, I want $30. They would take up to an infinite amount of money. If I had $1 billion for the hat, they would take it. So then, their view of how much it's worth is going to be really high. What we're trying to do is find that overlap zone where there is a price, say $12, where they'll sell it for $12. I'll buy it for $12. We agree. We're trying to find that equilibrium. But that $12 isn't like the correct price. We're just negotiating it. And I think it's the same thing. If we dispense with moral realism, look, I have my values, you have yours. And when we're trying to coordinate actions, if we lived on opposite sides of the universe and nothing we did to influence one another, there would be no need to negotiate. I do what I want, you do what you want. There's no conflict. The moment our values clash, I have my goals and you have your goals. The moment they clash, then we have a range of options available to us. One option is you could just try to kill anybody that interferes with you. Like some aliens might show up to Earth and say, we want all your resources. And then humans go, we could share some. And the aliens are like, no, we want all of them and we're going to kill you. There's no negotiating there. If there's no negotiating, you have to fight, and if you're an absolute pacifist, then I guess you don't do anything. The aliens eat you. So
right. So I half jokingly said, well, you didn't ask me, you asked Lance, but I said like half jokingly, it's power that decides it at the end. But that's basically it. Like, what else could it be?
Yeah, I basically agree with that. Ultimately, it comes down to you wield the power, you leverage what you can to get what you want, and that's Thrasymachus was just correct in Plato's Republic. It's just that's what it comes down to.
Like it's not even like
it's
not even that I'm trying to be like whatever controversial or anything like that, but it's just like I can't even think of anything that else that could be the deciding factor other than power. Like I can't even think of anything.
Well,
Well,
I
I
mean,
can think of.
the thing,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, the thing is that at that point, if we're bringing in like considerations of power, I just don't know how we're talking about morality anymore, right? Because I mean, like might doesn't make right, like might be a thought terminating cliche, but like if we get to a point where like the question of okay, well, I want like I I want your resources and you want to keep your resources. How would you say that? Well, in practice, of course, if I'm stronger than you, I can take your resources, and that's the end of it. Sure, okay. Uh,
Yeah, but what else? What else are you having in mind? Like, obviously, it's gonna come down to the might makes right. Like, I just I don't even understand. Like, I can't even imagine anything else. Like, can you imagine something else?
well, we need a language to be able to criticize like misuses of power. I think that's useful for society. Like
Well,
to
yeah, of course, we can come up with cooperation via language instead of like, kicking each other's asses. We can like cooperate and stuff like that. But
no,
if
okay, but like
somebody,
even like
yeah,
beyond
but
that, like
but but if somebody says no, fuck you, I'm gonna refuse cooperation and I'm just gonna go to war with you. Like I don't see
well, we need to be able
what
to.
can you say at that point other than, well, either you submit to them or you beat them, so it's gonna come down to power.
Yeah, you
Wh-
might have to submit to them. Like there's no like moral realism or whatever I'm arguing for, which I don't even have a name for. It's probably some kind of constructivism, but uh, like moral realism is not going to guarantee that only good things happen. Like it's not even if everyone became a moral realist tomorrow, people would still do bad things because like that's not the point of moral realism. What the point is not, and it's not to describe like what's going to happen, because what's going to happen in most of the cases is going to be some form of might makes right, because that's the world we live in. But we still need to have a coherent, or
Well,
as
hold on a second.
like
But
we need to be able to criticize.
aren't we interested in describing the world we live in and not like describing a fantasy world or something? Like
Well,
I mean,
I don't think
like
describing
I
the
don't
word is
even
the
understand
only.
what would be the fantasy world where
I'm not talking about the
something
fantasy world.
other than might makes
Hold
right
up here.
I'm
is
not talking about I'm not
Sorry,
Hello?
talking.
I think he's
true.
saying about like a social constructs, not like a fantasy world. He's saying
Yeah,
like we could have those constructs and moral constructs and just follow those. I don't
yeah.
think he's talking about another world.
Well,
No,
we
no, no, no,
have
not at all.
moral
I am not.
constructs, and we have like, for example, like stuff like laws and other stuff like, for example, if you date a woman that's much younger than you, then you may be like shunned from society or something like that. Like we have just
Those
like
are all
social norms
descriptive
and we
facts.
have laws. What else could there be?
Those are all descriptive facts. I'm not interested in describe. Like I agree, morality has no like descriptive value. Morality, the whole point is not to describe how things are, and it's not to describe some fantasy word, right? Morality is a language that we have to comment on what things are, right? In some ways, to
Well,
to
That
to
seems like moral realism a little bit.
yeah, that seems like
Well,
moral like
let
that
me
seems
jump in
like
here a
you're
little bit.
presupposing a particular definition of morality that
Hello,
uh,
can
I don't
can anyone hear me?
necessarily
Yeah, we could hear
agree
you.
with.
I think there's a misunderstanding going on. Maybe if I'm like wrong, then just correct me. But I think where there might actually not be a dispute here. So when the A guy is saying like might makes right, I think there's a misunderstanding between two senses of the term, right? So for example, I think one of the fellows seems to think that when he says might makes right, he seems to be thinking the idea or something to the effect that like, you know, at the end of the day, the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must, basically, right? Strong people are basically going to be able to get away with doing whatever they can, and weak people aren't going to be able to do anything about it. That's a descriptive fact, and I don't think if you're a moral realist or a moral anti-realist, you're not going to disagree with that statement, right?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, But I don't think that's what I think that's what the other person thinks you're disputing, right? He thinks that you're making the claim that like that you're going against this descriptive fact. I think that's why he seems to be
No,
talking
no,
about
no,
like
no,
the fact.
no, not at all. I said it very clearly. Like, as far as describing reality, like morality, like plays no role in that. Like moral discourse, at least, plays no role in that. It does not describe reality as it is. It is.
What? Like I don't even understand what we're talking about at this point. Like if you're not describing reality, what are you describing?
Well, you can
I'm not
offer.
describing anything. I am trying to. Well, ideally, I'm trying to change reality in some way by
You're
making more
trying to
arguments.
change reality, but how can you change reality if the thing that you think about is not part of reality? Like how can you make it part of reality if it's not part of reality?
Well, it becomes part of reality partly through
Through
if
words?
well, yeah. If I manage to convince everyone that say abortion is okay, then some Republican states would stop like
Well, I mean,
criminalizing them.
you could manage to persuade everybody to think that abortion is wrong or that abortion is right. Like, let's say you said the right set of words to persuade people of either one of those positions. That would not make it objectively right or wrong because there is no objective fact to the matter. Like just because everybody
Again,
agrees that
I don't think there are objective facts at all. So that's really not my angle here, and that's why it was because I think Lance understands where I'm going with this. At least
Yeah, that's why. So, Meat Machine, I appreciate the back and forth. I know
okay,
Antonio
yeah,
wanted
no,
to
no
ask some.
problem. Explain it to me because I'm not understanding it.
Well, let Antonio know I have a bit of a back and
Yeah,
forth,
go
and then
ahead.
I'd like to
I'm
bring
gonna
other
mute
people into the
myself.
conversation as well. Okay,
yeah,
no
I'm really
problem.
sorry. I don't mean to hog the whole stream. To be clear, just
Oh no, it's no problem. This is my first time having this many people in here, so I know a lot of people have been sitting here quietly waiting to jump in and say things, and I really want to give them that chance. So, just real quickly, look, I'm not endorsing might makes right in the sense that San K. I don't know how to
Kaz will do.
KASR.
Kaz will do.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, that is not what I'm saying when I'm like, yeah, basically might makes right or something like that. I don't actually think might makes right. What I'm saying is, when it comes down to things, if you're an anti-realist, on my view, agents have goals and desires, and they act to achieve their goals and desires. And when agents come into conflict with one another, where their goals and desires would potentially run up against other people's goals and desires, of course, it's an option to just fight and kill anybody and try to eliminate them. But like that's not a very useful. Like you're not going to do anything with that fact alone. If you and I are on an island, and I got access to water and you have access to food, one option might be violence, but another option might be, okay, well, we're both better off if we say, hey, let's work out a deal. And I see the construction of moral rules and principles as ones that there are going to be facts about how individuals could mutually optimize for their respective welfare by forming institutions, structures, rules, norms, and principles of various kinds in order to achieve those goals. And that can include the construction of moral rules that they then impose on themselves and the societies that they're in. And so I don't really have a problem with these kind of constructivist accounts of morality. And I think there's a lot of meat you could put on those institutional and normative bones. There's a lot of work to be done there. Like, I don't think morality comes down to bash everybody over the head with a hammer and take their stuff. That's not, if I tried doing that right now, I would not live a good life. If I don't break the law and don't run around bashing heads with hammers, things are going to go a lot better for me. And so if you're asking this question, how can I go about living the kind of life that's consistent with my goals and values? It's not wield your might. It's navigating the norms and institutions you're in. You might not like the norms and institutions you're in. And so you work within the norms and institutions you're in order to change them, to have a world more in the vision of what you want the world to be like. And in order to persuade other people, given that they have frequently different goals and values, you need to find some sort of principles and methods of adequately navigating those differences in order to achieve your goals. And I think the moral systems that we could fruitfully construct would emerge from that. Is that what you're getting at, Antonio?
Mostly, yeah. I think I would go a little farther in a couple ways. One is that it seems to me that the kind of thing you describe could still become compatible with like a purely like egoist, like self-interested sort of approach, where like basically I'm going to maximize my goals, and I know that I live in a society, etc., so I have to sort of give up on some of my goals for the sake of advancing my greater goals, which is understandable. Like that's a coherent view. I'm not necessarily dissing on it, but to me it seems like to really sort of make the kind of commitment toward what we can call sort of, genuine moral discourse, you have to also accept some kind of ability, some kind of second order evaluation of your goals, when you can actually recognize that you have certain goals, but that those goals might fail to that you might choose not to act on those goals, and not just because it's in your interest not to act on them, but because acting on those goals would or just endorsing those goals, right? And again, I'm trying to avoid as many sort of normatively loaded words as I can, because I don't want to
Well,
like
can I
presuppose.
just jump in for 1 second here?
Yeah,
It
real
seems to
quick.
me.
Real quick. Yes, you can. And then after that, Antonio, if you have any more questions, do you want to save them for next week, or because I want to turn the floor over to everybody now after
Well,
this?
I wanted to address what Antonio is the name.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, what Antonio was saying. Like, um, Antonio, it seems to me like you are presupposing that there is a better and worse option, but there is no objectively better or worse option. That is what moral anti-realism says. That we can agree, like we can say, okay, let's not bash each other's heads in. Let's like cooperate and whatever. Be like um,
Well, I, I,
you
I
know
under- I understand that this is your position, but I am sort of I am trying to push back
Well,
against.
but like I'm not just saying that this is my position because I think this is the only correct position.
Well,
I'm
I,
saying
I I know you do
there
that.
is no other imaginable position. Like how could you say that something is better if I disagree? Like if I say no, it's not. Like what are we then talking about? Like
Well,
your opinion versus
it's
mine, right?
possible it's possible that we'll never be able to agree, and that just means that we're not able to resolve this disagreement, and maybe that's fine.
But
Uh,
but what would be the real truth position? Like what would it be?
well, if we can't agree on, see, I really don't believe in the correspondence theory of truth. So I think that this whole discussion is sort of poorly set up, because, like, to me, truth is just what we. I mean, that's a terrible way to put it. I would have a much more nuanced way of putting it. But truth is basically what we can all agree on. And so, if we can't agree on something, then on some fundamental level, there is no deeper truth of the matter. You're right, but I still want there to be one. So I still think, and I think there is
Okay.
value in trying to find one. And so, if we
Well,
can't agree, then that's a shame. But like,
I think there is more value in understanding that there is none and to stop searching.
I think if there is none, we should work on it. We should get to work on constructing. Simply
All
put.
right,
Well,
I
we
would
can
like to
construct.
get.
Yeah, we
Hey, I
can
would like to other
construct.
people to get in. They've been waiting a long time, so maybe it was not a
Okay, go
optimal
ahead.
idea.
Sorry.
Okay.
No, it's no problem.
Yeah.
It's a little chaotic,
Yeah.
and I want to respect Antonio's like. Antonio, you probably just wanted to talk to me one on one, right?
Yeah. I really wanted to
All
talk
right.
one-on-one, to be honest.
Yeah, so I'm sorry that didn't happen. I just kind of let everybody in. My mistake. I'm still learning to do this. So, do you want to schedule something? Because that would make it like you could lock in a
Would
time
love
with
to.
me.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's do that, and then we could have that kind of one on one. But you're welcome to stick around if you want. But I want to open the floor up to everybody else because I really don't want people just sitting here staring at the screen.
Yeah.
Not able
Sure.
to see
Should I
anything.
like email you or?
That would be fine. You could leave a comment. You could email me. You should have my contact information on the about page. You could also probably message me on through Substack or my original Wix page. I don't know. There's probably a million ways to get.
Why
in touch.
don't you email like Michael Humer or somebody like that? I think they would be more like
Who, me?
no, Antonio, like some moral realist.
Well,
Like
if Antonio wants to talk to me, Antonio wants to talk to
Moral
me.
realist. Well, I mean, I have other disagreements.
Well, okay, I'm sorry, but it just like seems to me like he wants morality to be real, and so I'm just like making a joke about like why are you talking
I see.
to an anti-realist then? Why aren't you talking
Also,
to Humor? or
Michael
somebody?
Humer's kind of moral realism is really not interesting to me. but-
Okay. Whatever. It was just a joke.
Okay.
Okay.
Fair enough. Well,
All right. So yeah, Antonio, get in touch. I'll just put my email in the chat here. It's just my name at gmail.com. So just email me, and I'll set aside like a whole block for you, and we could talk one-on-one during one of my lives.
Thank
if
you.
that
Yeah,
sounds good.
that would be great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, so that relieves the pressure for me because I was getting all like self-conscious that you're like, I want to talk to you, Lance, and there's like 6 people here. Okay, so yeah, no, it's all good because I know some people want to have one-on-ones, some people want to just get into it. So let me hear from everybody else. Who has stuff to say? Do you have specific stuff? Let's get into it.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You can go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. I had a couple questions to ask you, Lance, but the Antonio guy said something really interesting. I think he said something to the effect that like he rejects like the concepts of like stance independence, like just wholesale. Like he thinks that everything is contingent on some stance. Do you agree with that, Antonio? Just to be sure.
Yeah, I do. I reject. Well, okay, we don't have to get into it. Sorry. Yeah, but yeah, I don't believe in stance independence. I believe that, like, what we call objective truth is basically constructed out of our subjective experiences.
So, I mean, well, that can mean a lot of things. But just to be sure, when I hear someone say that they reject stance independence, what I'm understanding that to mean is something like the truths of like physics and mathematics and biology and chemistry. These are things that are made true by like our psychology, right? Like 1 + 1 = 2, and like
descriptive
Sorry,
things.
Yeah.
Yes.
To simplify it, not to be confusing, like descriptive facts. So, for example,
descriptive facts, all kind of facts, they're made out of the raw material of our mental experiences.
Well, I mean, so I would agree with you that for us to know those things, right, we have to use our psychology, right? But that's a different claim from the fact that like our psychology makes them true. Like, do you understand the distinction between those two things? And
yeah,
why
I do understand the distinction, but I reject it. Like,
Okay.
I don't think it's like I think like we have this like abstract concept of like the outside reality, and like it like and probably it's like hardwired in our brains in some way. Like we have to think of an outside reality, of an outside world, of a minded independent world. But like when I think about it more deeply, like it just makes no sense. Like how would I know about something that's like wholly external from my mind? Like how could I even think of it coherently about something? Like if I think about something, it's in my mind, right? The thought of it is in my mind. So.
Yeah, I don't think anything can make anything true other than what exists in our minds. Like I don't like that seems to me
I
like
think it's
inevitable.
like another problem here, because he's saying the concepts are mind dependent, to which I would agree. So, for example, a gravity is a concept that is trying to describe a phenomena of objects attracting each other, right? So I would agree with him that the concept depends on our minds, but I would disagree on the descriptive fact. I would say there is something that exists, and we are trying to describe that thing using mental ideas. But
Exactly.
that thing, but that
really
thing that exists.
I'm sorry. What we're really describing is our observation of this phenomenon.
That's right.
That we
Yes.
see like things being attracted to each other.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but
that's the only thing there is our perception of the thing. What else is there?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
I mean,
Well,
but that's
okay,
like the entire
maybe I'm
issue at hand, you know?
misunderstanding. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding you guys, but like, it seemed to me like you were trying to draw a distinction between our perception and the real thing or something like that, which that is where I like become like very aggressive, and I want to say like there is no real thing, there is only our perception.
That's exactly what I was saying, to be clear.
Okay.
I mean, so would you guys like identify as like idealists? Like, I'm not like using it as a pejorative or anything. Like, okay. I'm
No,
just
no,
trying to
I'm a
clarify
proud
using-
idealist.
No,
I think. I think
I wouldn't. So okay, so let me just say this, like I think idealism is stupid. And at the same time, I think that I only have access to my, perception. Which basically, I'm just saying that I make like assumptions, let's say, about the real world. Like I am a subject that has consciousness, and I am making a model about the what's out there. That doesn't mean I'm an idealist, but it also doesn't mean that. Well, it certainly doesn't mean that I have access to the real, to like objective truth or anything like that. But it's just that I am a biological entity that operates on like basically well, brain stuff like induction, basically, and I make a model of the world that's out there. Like I think that there is a world out there, and I am trying to model it. But it's like I think that metaphysics basically is just like gibberish. Like it doesn't matter, like to say it's idealism or it's what like it doesn't matter what you say that it consists of. The basic reality is that you just simply experience the stuff that's out there, and you make assumptions, and you like like there are patterns and whatever, like patterns of experience, and you know um
Yeah. There's a lot there that I agree with, and there's some I disagree with. But I guess I was just kind of because it's so rare to meet someone who's like an idealist. So I was just kind of curious with Antonio. Why? Like, what's the main motivation behind the view?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think when I started thinking like deeply, okay, what do I even mean by there's an objective reality? Well, all I could think of is sort of what I see, what I hear, what I perceive with my senses, what I can conceive of with the concepts that I have in my abstract thinking, right? That's all there really is to it. Like in terms of things that I can reduce it to. So I'm not saying like I'm not necessarily even saying that like the material world doesn't exist per se. I'm just saying it's not fundamental because all the, everything within it can be reduced to facts about my own mental states. And I'm not a solipsist, but I mean, to be honest, like the existence of other minds, like the idea that like all of you all sort of have like minds just like my own, or at least that we have something in common, that we have all subjective experiences of that kind. Like that's something like I think fundamental we all take on faith, because on purely observational.
well, wouldn't it just be a better explanation that there is 6 people in here that are all having their all like subjective thoughts about, on this topic, rather than it's only me that exists and I'm imagining the other 5? Like,
Well,
wouldn't
yeah,
that
I
just
mean,
be a better explanation?
it just makes it just makes more intuitive sense to me. But there's no kind of evidence I could find that would.
Well,
prove
right, but I think that the only way you can decide between theories is which one offers a better explanation.
Yeah, no, that
I mean, there's more
that's
to it than
fair.
that. right? Like there's going to be like other theoretical virtues that you're going to care about, right?
Well,
Yeah.
what else? What else would there be?
Yeah, so you might care about like internal coherence, you might care about like fruitfulness, durability. Like there's like these list of like theoretical virtues that you'd care about. It's not just explanation, although explanation is a big part of it. But yeah, I think I would
Well,
disagree with the idea
can
that
you give as sorry, but can you give an example?
of
Like,
what
well, of what
of
you're
something.
saying that is other than better explainability or whatever.
Oh, okay, so yeah, so if I'm understanding you correctly, the question is like if you have like two models and one of them is explains more data, right? What other things should you care about? Okay, like another thing you might care about is simplicity, right? Let's say you
No,
have like
of course, simplicity and well, I mean, I didn't mention it, but yeah, of course, simplicity and explainability is like a trade-off.
yeah,
But
so that would be an
what
example.
else would there could there be?
Okay, so I guess like another one would potentially be like durability, right? Let's say you have like two theories. One of them is like simpler and explains better, but the other one might have like potentially it like withstands like criticisms better. Does that make sense? Or do you want me to like
It
elaborate?
withstands criticisms. Well,
Yeah, so like let's
I'm
say
just not sure what that means, I guess. Like,
okay, so let's say you have like two models, right? And the one that you think is like simpler and is better able to explain the data has like a lot of criticisms because it violates like some other theory that we believe to be true, right? So that means we think it's
okay,
probably okay, all right. Whereas
I
the other
see,
one
I
isn't
see.
suspect to that criticism, right?
I see. Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, yeah. I guess I kind of want to half disagree with that, but anyway, I'm taking up too much space already.
Mm.
Like, again, sorry.
I think maybe the disagreement is because you're thinking I'm making like a stronger claim than I actually am. I'm not making the claim that like explanation is unimportant. I might even like all I'm saying is that like there are other things to assess when it comes to like theory choice than just explanations. That's it. So yeah. Um I guess with Antonio, I'm still not really quite sure because you said something earlier to the effect of like you do think that the material world exists, right? So you just don't think it's like fundamental. So
Yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um. So you think that like sorry, it's just like very strange because most idealists tend to believe in like some sort of god. So and I don't think you do, or do you? Or
I, I, I'm agnostic. I don't. I don't. Yeah, I don't make any strong metaphysical claim that is sort of about something like beyond like the word as we understand it. But I think God could exist. I think any religion could be true. We just don't have any way of finding out, at least in this life.
hmm, I kind of want to push back on that, but I feel like that'll take us too far afield, to be honest.
Yeah,
So
but wouldn't that be interesting? Like, Lance, what is your metaphysical view? Wouldn't that be interesting to find out? Because you never talk about that actually, right?
Yeah, I don't talk much about my views outside of the particular areas of what the videos that I'm making are about or what the channel is really about. And I'm probably going to stick with that. So there's a few reasons why. One is that I just don't study those topics enough. And, it used to be if you talked to me like 15 years ago, I would have told you my views about anything. I had an opinion about everything. But one of the things that really happened from going through grad school a couple times is a sort of acute awareness of how profoundly ignorant I am of almost everything, and that led me to develop a sort of a deep calluses of discomfort whenever I discuss anything outside something that I've really studied quite a bit. And so I'm already just reluctant to talk about most topics because I just don't know enough about them, and I feel like when it comes to meta ethics and psychological stuff, like the very narrow stuff that I'm most familiar with, I feel like I'm moving at a certain speed, and then the moment I have to switch to another topic, I feel like I'm thinking through molasses, and it's really hard to do, and I don't like it. So part of the reason I want to talk about the stuff is because I don't like to. The other is that I'm not a broad, systematic, programmatic thinker on these things. Maybe some people are. I'm not. I remember. I think it was Dan Dennett who I heard make this compare. Like he's like, all right, well, some people do constructive philosophy, some people do destructive philosophies, and I don't remember exactly the conversation, but some people do both. You know, and I tend to lean heavily towards more destructive philosophy. Or you could say
That might be my
deconstructive.
biggest problem.
Yeah,
actually.
deconstructed.
Someone said it's their biggest problem.
Yeah, I said that might be my biggest issue with your approach, to be honest.
Well, that's fair, but you know,
That's what I like the most about you.
well, a lot of people don't like it. And look, it's very tough sometimes if you're leveling a critique for that critique to come from nowhere. You know, I'm taking on board at least some minimal degree of philosophical presumptions in leveling a critique, and that's not irrelevant. And so, some request that I say something substantive, I think is fair up to a point. I do dislike it if someone basically says you. So there's, I don't know if there's a name for this too. I'm making up fallacy names all the time, but you could call it the jump ship fallacy. So I'll give an example, and this is an area where I take a critical perspective. So I think the current peer review and academic publication system in academia is really, really, really bad. I think it's got all kinds of serious flaws. I think it's slow, ponderous, ineffective, prone to manipulation. I think it favors. I think it doesn't do enough to. I think it facilitates gatekeeping. It drives down innovation. I think it's got all kinds of problems. And on top of that, that's not even getting into the economic issues of basically, you know, soliciting peer reviews from people that in many cases are doing it for free, and then the journals are reaping all the profits, and then the journals get all this money from you know, people. They'll charge people to publish the papers. They'll charge universities for subscription fees. They'll put everything behind a paywall. So there's accessibility issues where you could even be paying tax money that goes into a grant that funds research. Then the research is published and you can't read it because it's behind a paywall and you don't have a, you know, .edu email account. So screw you, you don't get to read it. I don't like that. I have lots of issues with it. Now, if you say, I think there's lots of problems with the peer review and publication systems, what a lot of people say is effectively, well, what's your solution? What's the alternative? And like, unless, and if you say, well, maybe the alternative is this, we publish preprints, or maybe the alternative is that, or maybe the alternative is this. People
Just
will
open it up, dude. Like just let anybody publish whatever they want, and
well, that could get very
give a
complicated
shit
very
about
quickly.
credibilities or whatever, you know.
Well, so the issue is that a lot of times people will demand a basically perfect solution, or like what seems to them from the armchair to be obviously better. And if you can't provide it, then it's as if they dismiss your critiques of the current system.
Yeah, I get your point that if you don't have a better solution, then we'll just keep doing the bad thing that we're doing, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, look, there's a certain point if you're in a ship and the ship is sinking and the ship is going down. You might think, I'm going to stay in the ship and try to keep it afloat as long as possible, hoping a rescue team comes or another ship shows up or whatever. At a certain point, if that ship is on fire and it's half underwater, you got to jump in the water. And, you know, are you going to survive? Maybe, maybe not. But at a certain point, the cost benefit to staying on the ship it becomes too costly. And that assessment is difficult to make in a particular situation. But this is why, you know, you could think of it as like the jump ship fallacy. There's a presumption to think, well, unless you have a perfect ship to jump into, you just stay in your sinking ship. And it would be really silly, you know, you're in your sinking ship and then like a little boat comes by and you're like, it's too small. I'm not going to get in that one. A larger boat comes by. Wait, they don't have air conditioning on that boat. I'm not getting on that one. Another boat comes by. They don't even have fresh water on the boat. I'm not getting on that boat. And then your boat sinks and you die. That's stupid. And so this idea that you need a perfect solution before you come up with an alternative, I think that's a bit silly. Anyway, I could say very briefly, because you did ask about my metaphysics, very roughly, I have pragmatist leanings. I'm going to tend to be super skeptical of a lot of the standard ways in which things are framed in contemporary analytic philosophy. I'm very skeptical of a lot of more robust metaphysical accounts. I'm not really going to like them very much. I'm going to tend to take a lot of anti-realist and skeptical perspectives on a lot of things.
Well, hold on. Isn't pragmatist more like isn't it that more like an epistemological view? Like, how is pragmatist a metaphysics? Like, what does that mean?
Well, so pragmatism is going to be rather broad in what it addresses. So pragmatism is more a sort of method or perspective to philosophy as a whole, and it's going to influence your perspective not just on epistemology, but on value theory and metaphysics as well. And so it's just going to basically
Oh, really?
influence.
Is that actually in the works of those people? Like, I don't remember the names that you mentioned, but those American pragmatists, they had like a holistic system. Like, it wasn't just epistemology; it was metaphysics and ethics and all of that.
So this is why I'm not going to be able to offer you a substantive and satisfactory response. I haven't adequately read this work to really know.
Okay, no
But
problem. I was just
so
wondering.
yeah, so a lot of these views they're going to be, you know, they're going to be very you could call them radical empiricists, and they're going to take an empiricist perspective on things, and that's going to influence their
Yeah.
view on ethics. It's going to influence their view on all sorts of things, and certainly they're going to have things to say about metaphysics. It's not like pragmatism just leaves your views on metaphysics completely untouched. But I just wouldn't be able to offer you any kind of developed programmatic sketch of things because I just don't have.
That's fine. I was just
Yeah, so
curious.
I would say that and this is really more, it's not like I read a bunch of pragmatism and then I'm like, okay, I'm a pragmatist. What's really happened is I level a bunch of critiques of realists and a lot of work in contemporary analytic philosophy, and then people who are pragmatists and could say a lot more about it are like, oh, so you're a pragmatist? And my reaction is, am I? And they're like, well, it sure as hell looks like it. Look what you say about this. Look what you say about that. And from looking at the kinds of comments that people like William James and FCS Schiller make, I see a lot of resonances there, but I haven't dug into it enough to really be able to fluidly speak about it with any degree of sophistication or substantive knowledge. So I can't.
Yeah, I see.
I can't really
Okay,
comment too
that's
much.
fair.
But
yeah.
yeah, roughly that's where I would be inclined towards things. But yeah, my work tends to focus on critiques of other people's work.
Mm.
And if people don't like that, I don't know.
No, that's why I like you. Like,
Well,
I love that shit. Like when you like tear somebody apart. You know, I mean, you are very like nice with how you do these things, but I'm just like saying that I'm drawn to your work because of its because of like that it's
It's more
critiquing
deconstructive.
other
Yeah.
How destructive it is.
yeah, destructive. Well, I mean, you know, if you say destructive, then you know, you could take it the wrong way. But yeah, I think that like this you know what did they call it in the
Deconstructive, I think is the word.
deconstruct? Exactly. Yes, that is what I like. So yeah,
well, I appreciate
that's what
that.
I'm here.
Yeah,
That's why I'm here. Yeah.
a few things to say about this is that destruction isn't irrelevant to construction. You often have to clear away the crap before you can build good stuff. So I see part of what I'm doing as a sort of, I see it as a sort of important inclusion in the overall sort of philosophere. I really think that we need more people doing critical and destructive work. I think that philosophy is heavily prone to entrenched dogmas and presuppositions, just permeating the field and influencing how everybody thinks about everything. I mean, the biggest problem for me is that philosophers just seem to be, and I mean specifically contemporary analytic philosophers, completely recalcitrant to updating their views on language and cognition. They won't freaking do it. And it's really, 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 really frustrating. And there's this sort of hostility towards engagement with the empirical sciences. Just what you're seeing is you're just going to keep seeing more and more people that are going to go elsewhere than contemporary academic philosophy because they're going to see the writing on the wall that the field is just not. It keeps the successes of the science keep making philosophers get defensive about defending their turf and making themselves increasingly insular. In fact, there's even empirical research showing that philosophers tend to cite one another and not everybody else, but everybody else tends to more reliably cite each other. And so philosophy is sort of it makes me think of Kyoshi from Avatar: The Last Airbender gets really pissed off and breaks the land off and sends everybody away. I don't know if anybody gets that reference. That's what came to mind. Too bad. That's what came to mind for me. But so the philosophers, they see all the scientists being all successful and they're like, damn it, we don't want to just be scientists. And so they earth bend and they break off on their own little island and they're like, we're on our own island. We do our own thing.
Yeah,
And
exactly. And
catastrophic.
they have like no way of proving each other wrong, so they just follow the pattern from the past, right? Like
Right. So this is
Yeah.
what I talk about. I have this 9-part blog series where it's called the Phil Papers Fallacy, where you have this. They did this big survey, 2020 Phil Paper survey. Does everybody know about it already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm always talking about it. So you see on there 62% moral realism, and some people, this doesn't happen in academic publications, but people in these kinds of discussions will bring up that and be like, look, there's more realists than anti-realists. You at least got to take realism seriously. I mean, it really depends what you mean by take it seriously. Like engage with it and engage with the arguments and don't just laugh at them. Absolutely, of course, I'm taking it seriously. Think that it has a non-negligible chance of being true. I'm not so sure about that. So there's this one sense in which I take it seriously and one sense in which kind of not really. I mean, it certainly means that I'm not going to stop engaging with it. There are certain arguments like flat Earth. I'm not going to take that too seriously. But realism I take seriously in the relevant senses. But there's lots of reasons to be concerned about appeals to what most philosophers think. And I think part of one big issue I point to is that in the cases of doctors and chefs and engineers is that there are external means of corroborating whether they're good at what they do. So how do you tell that an engineer that builds bridges is good at building bridges? Well, they built a bridge 20 years ago, it's still standing. Okay, looks like they could build a dang bridge, But
Makes sense.
how do we independently evaluate whether philosophers have correct intuitions? They just say, well, we're experts, our intuitions are correct. But there's no independent means of corroboration as far as I could tell. So now
well,
what?
I guess it depends on what a philosopher is in the modern age, right? Like if he is able to like pull lots of students and they want to join like his course and study with him, then maybe that is the proof,
Wait,
like
why
there
would
is
that be an
nothing else.
indication?
Yeah, I don't know why that would be evidence.
Yeah, why would
Well,
that be an indication that what he's saying is true?
no, well, no, it wouldn't be. It
Okay.
would just be proof that he is a successful philosopher. Like maybe that is what a successful philosopher is.
Well then I think there's just like some like idiosyncratic definition of like success going on. Like maybe you just mean like material success or something like that, or like rhetorical success. Then yeah, he's
Well,
successful in those
I'm
domains.
not saying anything. I'm just saying like that would be an option. Like maybe it's something else, but like there is no bridge to be built, right? Like as a philosopher, you can build a bridge to show that you actually know what you're talking about. So it has to be something else, like that. And by building a bridge, I just mean like something in the material physical world that you can show off. Like there is no such thing, and therefore there needs to be a different
Criteria for success. Yeah,
criteria. Yeah.
I kind of get what you're saying, but I do think philosophers are experts in some things, right? So, for example, they're probably experts in telling whether or not like an argument is valid, right? Like they're probably going to be experts in all sorts of things. Like probably my guess is that like philosophers are more likely to have like cultivate like certain epistemic virtues, like intellectual curiosity, like honesty. This is, by the way, I don't have like any empirics for it. This is just like my intuition, right? So I might be wrong.
Certainly they have. I mean, certainly they would have certain characteristics. Philosophy professors, like they are probably above average intelligent and stuff like that. But in terms of the success of their project, it's like it like becomes really difficult. In the sense of like what the fuck are they doing, like what, like okay, like I can tell you whether this argument is valid. Okay, who gives a shit, like build a bridge instead. Oh, I'm gonna
Um,
talk to the engineer instead. Like who cares if the argument is valid,
I think I think philosophy at its best is basically a bridge to other disciplines, right? It's basically trying to get like a holistic worldview, and you're trying to connect everything together in like the best way you can. You try to like shore up like contradictions in your worldview. You try to think about like paradoxes, and you try to basically think deep about reality. I think that's philosophy at its best. Philosophy at
Well,
its worst can basically just be like this like made up language where it's not really like interacting with anything else in the world. And truth be told, it's not really clear what, even if they were true, what any of this would even amount to, or what difference it would make to reality. um so it's a little, it's an interesting discipline. But yeah, I feel like I've been talking for a lot. So if the other two guys want to like say anything or like input anything, or if you guys think I'm talking too much, just speak up. It's
no,
okay.
no,
Yeah, I'd
if
like.
anyone's talking too much, it's me. But I just want to add one last thing on top of what you just said, is that I agree that yes, philosophy is interesting, and I love philosophy, and that I think it's Graham Oppy. Well, maybe he's not the originator of this idea, but that the concept that once philosophy stops being philosophy, it becomes like science or whatever, and then you just um like basically everything that's philosophy is always like up in the air or something like that. Like you're not sure, because once it's established, it becomes like physics or chemistry or something like that. But
Yeah,
I'm
this is
just
the view.
wondering, yeah, but I'm just wondering, like, how many more of those can we establish in the modern age? Like, how many more physics and chemistries can we establish
Oh,
that we haven't yet established?
I mean,
If you
my guess
understand
is,
what I'm saying.
yeah, I get it. Like, I get what you're saying. You're basically saying, like,
Yeah,
of the philosophy that we have now currently, like, how much of it is going to be like
yeah,
subsumed under sciences? My guess is like a pretty large amount. Like, I think a lot of like questions in like philosophy of mind are basically going to be resolved by neuroscience in the future. Same with like philosophy of physics. I think that like is what's like a view like substantivalism versus like relationalism, if I'm saying those terms right. I think that's just going to be a question that's just going to be adjudicated by best physical theories. Um, but yeah, I think the view that you was mentioning earlier, that the idea that like philosophy is basically like an incubator for the sciences, is something that I like endorse like quite a bit. I think it's like I think it's pretty much sound, right? Um, and I think
yeah.
that's one of the other utilities of like philosophy, right? It can basically be like a sort of like birthing ground, I guess, for like other disciplines and like other like research programs and stuff like that. So yeah, I think there's like a lot of utility to philosophy. Um,
I think there's always going to be so much more to human inquiry than the kind of questions that can be answered by science.
Your
So
sound is a bit low.
oh,
Now it
sorry.
sounds better.
Yeah, I don't know why I've been having trouble with my audio. Yeah, I just wanted to say I think there's always going to be so much to human inquiry that science will not be able to answer. So
um,
I just wanted to disagree with that.
sorry, just what do you mean by science? I'm sorry, I hate to do it, but like, I'm just really
I want
actually
to
go
jump
ahead,
in real
Lance.
quick just to say I
Yeah,
really want to hear from PKD because I specifically invited PKD to show up, and then you're being very polite by
so,
hanging
sorry.
out. But
Yeah, because like the
Sorry.
thing is with Lance, we talk almost like every day in the last like I don't know 2-3 weeks, sometimes like 7-8 hours on Discord. So
Wait, really?
I'll
Wow,
feel
cool.
I'll feel really bad
Well,
if I
then you
just
don't need to talk right now, right?
but
exactly
this is
that's what I've
that's the
been
whole point. Is
quiet.
this is for an audience? We have good conversations, and
Yeah.
the people want to hear
No,
them.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I mean, look, you guys can finish, and then we have.
No, it's all good.
I have interesting view that I want to present, and Lance
Yeah. Okay.
knows
Yeah.
Well,
For
about.
sure.
I want to hear
just
it.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
Yeah.
Just
yeah, go
jump
ahead, man.
in.
It's okay.
Say
I've been
what you
talking
want to
too much.
say,
Yeah, I've been talking way too much. It's okay. Go ahead, man.
because there will be no end to the fucking scientist question. Like.
Sure, yeah, of course. So you guys know companions in guilt arguments for moral realism, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, yeah, so it goes as follows, like just to explain the argument a little bit. If moral realism is false, then normative epistemic realism is also false. And it basically, what the realist is trying to do here is basically saying, look, if you reject moral realism, then you also need to reject a normative epistemic realism. And this is seen as, that the anti-realist is biting a big bullet there, that this is, not plausible, etc. And then obviously there is the third level, that if you reject normative epistemic realism, then you don't have a stance-independent epistemic reason to justify your belief in
It's like
anti-realism.
self-defeating, basically.
It's self-defeating, but that
Yeah.
will be true only if you accept that you need
Yeah,
stance-independent
no, I
normative
don't
epistemic
accept
realism.
it, but yeah.
Yeah, of
I
course,
just
yeah.
wanted,
Yeah.
okay.
So on the contrary, I made companions in innocence argument for moral anti-realism, and it goes as follows. If moral realism is true, then price realism is also true. So both of those goals like companions in guilt. And just to explain what price realism is to people, I'll be surprised if you know about it, because I just invented it like 3 days ago. So I'll just read it out. So price realism is the belief that the prices of products or services are intrinsic to them and do not depend on our attitudes, preference, or appraisals. We often hear people say that certain things are expensive, so that's a value judgment, while others are cheap. It seems that prices guide our actions. We often seek to buy things that comfort our budgets. Moreover, we frequently encounter significant disagreement regarding prices for particular items or services. In these disagreements, people strive to determine the real price that is independent of our appraisal. And price anti-realism fails to explain those disagreements, because if prices were solely dependent on our appraisals, such disagreements would not make sense. Furthermore, we can imagine that if we desire an item to cost a specific amount of money, the price simply does not change. And this is evidence for price realism. If you're a price anti-realist, you cannot evaluate anything as expensive or cheap, since those terms are reserved for the price realists, and those terms are normative and irreducible. This is simply how language functions. Any attempt to assess something as cheap or expensive as a price anti-realist would be an acknowledgement of price realism. So basically,
That's good.
I'm convinced personally. I think it's pretty great, man.
So it's
I'm
it's a kind of
convinced too. I'm a price realist.
And we
Yeah,
have,
100%.
and we like the thing is, guys, we can have this little thought experiment right here. So imagine John is going to buy some stuff, and he has a list, and we know exactly what John wants to buy. But when John returns back to us after his shopping, we notice that John bought some extra items, and we asked him, why did you buy those? And he just said that he had a reason. And we asked him, well, what's the reason? And he just said, well, the price was right. So from this we can deduce that some prices are right,
the
and
price
other prices
itself is the reason that he
It
bought
is reason giving, exactly. It is reason giving, and we can also make a bigger claim that is intrinsically motivating, because he just said the price was right. That's the reason. It gave him a reason, and if the price was wrong, he simply wouldn't buy the items.
Yeah.
And this is obviously a parody position, but we can mimic everything that the moral realist says with price.
Yeah, but is it the same thing as like gastronomic realism, or is the price being the right thing?
I mean, they're both
does
like
that
trying
make
to
it
highlight.
different?
That's right. It is similar,
point.
however, it is similar to gastronomic realism. However, my concern with gastronomic realism from debating moral realists on Discord is they just accept it. So I had to come up with something new.
Really? They just say that like pizza tastes objectively good or something
Stands independently tasty.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, look, I have a folder with screenshots. Some realists just accept it, and I had another
I wouldn't have expected that.
with aesthetic realism.
But yeah, my question was like, is that different from the guess? Like, is your like, I guess, economic or maybe not economic, but like money realism
Price
different
realism.
from?
Yeah. I can comment on this. It
Yeah.
is different, and part of the reason it's different isn't it can be cashed out in terms of how, if you're offering sort of plausible characterizations of how people actually speak and think in the everyday circumstances. With gastronomic stuff, it really does appear that it's much more closer to a more subjective and expressivist way of people talking about food. So if someone says this pizza's delicious, it actually isn't radically implausible to say that's just an expression. They're not trying to assert a proposition. It's not that implausible to say that they're making a subjective claim about their personal preferences, and they're not trying to universalize the claim and say that it stands independently delicious. It's not that implausible. But and you might think, and to some extent it probably is with price, because I think a lot of people, especially professional philosophers that understand moral realism, would react to price realism by going, oh, this is clearly satirical. Like, of course, I don't have the intuition that price realism is true. So they'd probably do that. But the point is just not so much that it's a sort of direct appeal to the intuitions or anything like that, because I doubt many people have price realism intuitions, at least not professional philosophers, although maybe some do. The point is that what's really cool about it is if you look at the way that a lot of realists critique anti-realist positions, it's often on the basis of a supposedly sophisticated analysis of ordinary moral claims. And so the way that that works, for instance, Mike Humer does this, where Mike Humer has this like 1, 2, 3 knockout, where Humer basically says this: look, you've only got a few anti-realist options, and then you've got realism. And if I could make an argument against the anti-realist positions, I demonstrate realism is true. So here's how this works. Okay, well, the expressivist, the non-cognitivist, says that moral claims just express non-propositional content. Well, that's ridiculous because of the Frege-Geach problem. So, you can't, it doesn't make sense to say if boo murder, then boo this or boo that. Like it can't figure into an argument. And yet moral claims do clearly, intuitively, it seems they can figure into arguments. And then other things like you can't really deliberate. Is it really the case that boo? That doesn't make sense, but it does seem reasonable to think, is it really the case that murder is wrong? In the same way you might think, is it really the case that there's life on Mars or whatever? And so it looks like structurally and syntactically, it functions propositionally. So we rule out non-cognitivism. And then you do this for error theory and relativism. Well, do we think it's really the case that if our society thought murder was okay, then murder would be okay? No, that's silly. Is it the case that I think if suddenly I got hit in the head and I thought murder was okay, that murder would be okay? No, that's silly. So we rule out subjectivism and cultural relativism. And then finally, error theory. The error theorist would say that it's not true that murder is wrong, or like the statement murder is wrong is not true. That's ridiculous. And so we rule out error theory. And so, well, we've ruled out the only possible anti-realist position, so realism wins by default. So that's one type of move that Humer has made. And so you can actually do something very similar with price realism, where when people are talking about the prices of products, you can reason stuff like this. For instance, if cars are more expensive than bikes and bikes are more expensive than shoes, then cars are more expensive than shoes. Or if a Lamborghini is more expensive than a Prius, then you would have to spend more money then you ought to spend more money to acquire it. It is more expensive, so you ought to spend more money to acquire it. Stuff like that. You could embed price claims in arguments like pretty easily. And you could also think, is the price of a diamond really $3? Well, look, it looks like the way you deliberate about price has this seeming, it's not made true by your preferences. And so it doesn't seem that non-cognitivism makes sense of the way that we talk about price. We really do talk about price propositionally. There are facts about what things cost. So you set aside price non-cognitivism. That's a stupid view. It doesn't work. Cognitivism about price at minimum. So then we go to relativism. Well, if all of our society decided that a particular thing was more expensive than another, would it be more expensive? Well, no, because think about if a particular community of people all decide that, let's say we want to import a product from another country, and we want to buy, amber from a country that has amber, and they all, as a culture, decide it's worth $1 billion an ounce. Would you have to pay $1 billion an ounce? No, because you don't agree on the price. So the mere fact that that culture thinks it's worth something doesn't really make it worth something. So cultural price relativism is obviously false. Cultures can't just decide what things cost. And then you do this at the individual level. I can't go to a store and say, I go to the store and I want to buy a Lamborghini, and they tell me I don't know how much Lamborghinis cost. I've never shopped for one, but
$2.
I want to buy one.
$2.50.
250,000?
No, $2.50.
No, that's not how much
He's
they
joking.
cost. So I go to the store and they tell me, let's look it up. How much is it? I've got to know.
Yeah, but
Hold up, I'm not done with the whole. I want to finish.
Yeah,
going
I
through the
know
whole
you're not
lineup.
done, but I just want to while you're
I'm
looking
gonna
this
finish
up,
that.
like I just want to say this just sounds stupid. Like, of course
the
we
point here is
decide.
that
Of course
the
we
point is that
decide what items cost.
But
well,
wait,
the point is
don't
that
you?
you're
decided.
mirroring the way that realists argue against anti-realist positions. So if it sounds stupid, then you might also think by parity of reasoning that the realist critiques of anti-realist positions are stupid. That's the whole
Of
point.
course,
Anyway,
of
okay,
course.
so
I mean,
we go back to
I wouldn't be
relativism.
here if I thought. Well, I guess maybe I would be here or whatever. But yeah, of course, I'm an anti-realist. I find that whole naming kind of ridiculous, that the anti-realists are called anti-realists even though they are the only one that are even remotely like close to what's actually going on, but whatever.
Right. Okay. So let me get back to going through the whole process.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
So, and I no, it's not. It's all good. So I looked up Lamborghini. The what I see here from just Googling it, the cheapest Lamborghini would cost you $211,000. Okay. So I go to the store. I want to get a Lamborghini. They tell me it's $211,000, and if I want any extra stuff, it's going to be way more than that. Okay. And then I say, okay, well, because price subjectivism is true, and I prefer that it actually costs $1. It in fact does cost $1, so you got to sell it to me for that. That's ridiculous. That is not going to happen. No one would take that seriously. And so far we've ruled out price non-cognitivism. It's obviously false because we can deliberate and embed claims about price in arguments. We've ruled out price culture relativism because if some culture decides their products are worth millions of dollars, we don't have to buy them for that much. That's absurd. That's false. And price subjectivism is clearly false. I don't get to decide what the prices of the products are. My preferences don't make it true that they're worth that much. And then so finally we get to price error theory. And then you would have statements like Lamborghinis are more expensive than, a Ford Taurus. That statement, if you're a price error theorist, that statement's false. Well, that's obviously ridiculous. Of course they're more expensive. Or imagine someone saying a pile of gold, a million pounds of gold is more expensive than a bucket of poop. Okay, if you're an error price realist, you think that's false. That is so obviously absurd. Of course, price error theory is false. And so now what we've done is exactly what Humer has done in clearly ruling out all of the anti-realist positions. Same thing here. We've ruled out all the anti-realist positions. And so price realism has to be true. And so I think if Humer's argument works, this argument works. And so price realism's got to be true, or there's something wrong with Humer's argument.
The thing is, I think that this sorry, just a second. I think this argument works against like price non-cognitivism, price error theory, etc. The ones that Lance cited. Like I think this argument is actually good at debunking those specific theories. It doesn't prove price realism, obviously, but that's why the door is still open for price constructivism, for example.
My question would have been.
But here is the problem, though. If you think that price is just a construct, like, when the price is evaluated by supply and demand, sometimes we have those situations that you get, let's say, a service, right? And you know how much the service costs, and you know that it matches the price, the supply and demand, right? However, after you got the service, then you got this intuition, those intellectual seemings, right? Well, this thing is actually more valuable, so you pay the higher price, or I should say the real price, because you don't want to fail your price duties.
Do you actually have those?
I actually have.
I do.
I mean,
I don't think I've ever had those. Like if I go to fucking barber or something and get my hair cut, I don't have an intuition that actually this would have been cheaper or whatever. Like it's just what it says on the menu.
Hold up.
Sorry.
We can make the same move that moral realists would make when we anti-realists like myself report not having the intuitions. They'll just say you're conceptually impoverished. Well, it's
Damn.
not my
Yeah,
choice if you
well,
don't have
right,
the
but
information. I have
like
it.
that was my initial question. Like, who fucking buys this crap from humor? Like, I don't, like that just sounds like crazy talk to me in the first
So,
place.
so there's like a couple things here, right? Number one, I think I do have price intuitions, but not in the way, not price realist intuitions, right? So, for example, sometimes I feel like I'm getting ripped off, right? But that's only with respect to like like the typical price that I usually have, right, at something, right? If someone like is like paying like £5 for like a sandwich where I know it should be like £2.50 or something like that, I feel like I'm getting ripped off, but it's not in any like stance independent way, right? And
But wouldn't
yeah,
that be more like if you are in a particular context, like let's say you are in Rome, in Italy, and you know that there are like street vendors, and you know that they charge way too much for their fucking sunglasses or whatever, and you say, oh well, they say whatever, $5, and you say no, $4, and blah blah blah. So you understand like the context of what is happening. But how would you know that something is like the
like too
cost is
expensive.
too much in
It's just
in
gonna
a
be like
regular
it's,
context? I don't understand that.
yeah, it would just be basically dependent on your like past experience. So for example, right, let's say you have like a sandwich, you've had a couple of them, you roughly know the price. It's usually around £2, £2.50, £3, something like that, right? If you see one that's like £7 or £8, that's like completely out of accord with your past experiences. So the way you would figure out whether or not like something is going to be like too expensive or whatever like that is just going to be
Right.
contingent on like
Well,
the
just
things you've
like
had in the
everything
past.
else from past
Yeah,
experience, right?
but
Yeah, yeah. But
there was
maybe
something you
it's a
said.
really good sandwich. Like, maybe it's
Oh,
worth the $7.
maybe it's like a Michelin star restaurant, and this is like the best
Yeah.
sandwich ever. Like they got like this really fancy technique. The bread, like by itself, like takes like decades to make. I don't know. Maybe that sandwich is worth paying more for. I don't know, right? But there was something you said that I really wanted to pick up on, right? You said something like who like buys this like crazy talk or something to that effect, right?
Yeah.
I think that's probably too strong a claim. I think
Yeah,
moral
I
realism
mean,
as
I
well.
know that like apparently 60% of whatever percent are of philosophers are moral realists, which I think that's crazy. But yeah, apparently there are people that are buying this shit.
So
I really think we should be a little more humble here. Like Lance, Lance actually has a PhD in the matter, so he's earned the right to be confident on these matters.
Well, I
I
don't
think the rest
actually
of us
care that much about PhDs or anything like that. Like I'm
well,
gonna
yeah,
make up my
okay, but
mind
like I don't know.
anyway. I'm not gonna get a PhD in ethics before I make up my mind about
No,
moral
you're free to
realism,
make up your mind, but just like being so dismissive of other people's views, like
Well,
that
I
just
think
makes
it's
me wrong.
I think Lance is right, is basically right. It's unintelligible. I think that's correct.
well, wait.
I,
There's a world. Wait. I'm sorry. This is just really, really important. There's a world difference between a position being unintelligible and crazy, right? Like I think like Christianity and like Islam. Like if you was to like describe the position, I think it's probably an unintelligible. But I think it's like an insane position to call like most Muslims or most Christians crazy.
Um. Well, I don't care so much about calling the people crazy or whatever, but I'm just like, yeah, I think like believing in God is dumb and believing in morality is dumb. So yeah, I'm just gonna call it
And that's
like I see it,
that's
like.
probably like even worse, right? Like calling them like dumb. Like wait, you think like everyone who believes in God is dumb? Like you think like Leibniz and like Newton and like Descartes, you think those guys were stupid?
Um, well, I mean, they probably had high IQs, like probably Leibniz had a high IQ or whatever. But when
Yeah,
it
so they weren't
comes
dumb then.
to believing in religion, yeah, he believed in some crazy shit. Yeah.
I don't like where this conversation is going. This isn't. I don't think this is a productive way to discuss this stuff. So we're gonna
Okay.
not do
Yeah,
that.
Well,
we'll just
No, I,
what
I
do you
appreciate you
mean
jumping in.
it's not?
So
What do you mean it's not productive?
I
Like,
don't have
what
to
do you?
defend that. It's my channel, so I'll decide if I
yeah,
don't want a conversation to continue.
sure.
I don't look. We don't need to like. There's better and worse ways of framing.
Well, I mean, if
different
it would
positions.
help me to understand what you
I
regard
see. Okay,
as
sure.
productive or
So
not
let me
productive.
give my perspective on this then. People can be really smart, really thoughtful, really reflective, really honest, really sincere, really committed. They could do all sorts of things and then still make mistakes. There's an absolute guarantee that no matter how good I am at thinking, which I might not even be that good, but let's just say I am, it's inevitable that I'll be making mistakes. Everyone does. And so where a mistake occurs, the juncture at which it occurs in a chain of reasoning, can be traced back often to really foundational issues for which I don't even think that I would hold a person especially accountable. There were undoubtedly thousands of really, really, really sharp people. Let's just say that there are no good arguments for theism or Christianity or whatever. There would have been thousands of people that were just really, really thoughtful and smart people, just better thinkers than me, that were so saturated in a Christian worldview, let's say in like 900, CE or something, that's just not something that they ever could have reasonably escaped from just simply due to environmental conditions. And so even if it's not an intellectually defensible position, in spite of their abilities, they still held the position. So I think it's very difficult to make sweeping claims about whether a person that holds a particular position is stupid or insane or dumb.
Okay, so I wasn't so much talking about the person, but about the position itself. Like like the position is stupid. Like,
right? You were saying the position is dumb. I get that.
I'm not talking about the person. Like whatever, Like I think Darwin is like a cutting off point. Like before Darwin, you could believe in whatever because like you didn't fucking know where life originated.
What?
But after that, like you could be really smart, but you just didn't know. You had no idea. But after that, you would have to kind of adapt. And if you didn't adapt after Darwin, well, then it means that there is like some motivated reasoning going on, probably.
Or maybe there are things that you don't know about people, and we shouldn't like try to act like we know better.
Well, whatever. I don't really care about calling people dumb or stupid. Like I don't really care about that. Like really. Like
really?
I'm just saying that like you have no reason to believe in gods. You have all reason to believe in evolution. You have no reason to believe in moral realism. Like there are these certain things that are just like present themselves, and I think that deviating from those means that you have some ulterior reasons for deviating.
Okay, look, I get all that, and I understand if you're saying of the view is dumb and not necessarily the person that holds the view, but you might personally have the attitude that look, you call a spade. If a view seems dumb to you, call it dumb. Do keep in mind though that if you are saying that to someone that held those views, that even if in your mind there's a clear separation between a view being dumb and the person being dumb, if you tell me my views are dumb, it's going to be really easy for someone to take that to be a slight or an insult against them.
Well,
and
I
it's just
guess
even if you think that, it might just not be a good thing to say it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, but like, how am I? Like, if you're saying I'm not allowed to present my views, then okay, fine, or whatever. You can ban me from speaking.
I'm not going that far. I'm just saying dial it back a bit on that stuff. Here.
Well, I'm just not seeing a way to say what I think about, like, for example, theism. Like, I think theism is crazy. I don't think I need to hold back and say like, oh well, it's like whatever you think, mate. Like, I think it's actually crazy to believe that a guy rose from the dead and went to heaven or whatever. Like, I think that's a crazy view to hold. Like that is crazy to me.
Right,
okay,
but the thing is that
sorry, go ahead. My bad. Go ahead.
Yeah, people have those beliefs, and they're usually very personal beliefs. They have a lot of sometimes emotions behind those. And if you want to discuss with a theist the proposition whether or not God exists, and you bring up an argument that God doesn't exist. For example, the argument of evil is a really strong argument against the existence of the tri-omni-God, at least. That's fine. But do you think you're gonna go far if you just start insulting their view? They'll take it very personal.
like there is no theist in this chat room, right? So I'm not like telling, so to speak,
Well, I have
to your
close
face.
theist friends, and I really don't appreciate them
Well,
being
okay,
referred to like that. But
fine. Then
whatever. It's just my
Yeah,
opinion. But
we need to move.
Lance's opinion is more important.
Yeah, we need to
than
move
mine.
on from this. What I'll
Okay.
say
yeah,
about this
just move
is,
on. It doesn't
yeah, yeah,
matter
yeah.
that much. Yeah.
It doesn't matter that, like, okay. What I will say about this is, even if someone's not in a chat, I don't want to alienate viewers by
Right. Yeah.
saying and framing things in a way that's going to upset people.
Right. The context is
So-
your channel, and what you want is, those other rules, and I
Right,
think
cool.
that's
Okay.
perfectly fine. Yeah.
All right, so back to the price realism thing. Basically, the point just is, so you said something about humor's views, like who takes that seriously? Well, humor takes it seriously, and I think quite a lot of people in academia take the objections to anti-realism very seriously. I think that a lot of people are going to take that kind of analysis. Now, I also should say, I'm characterizing stuff Humor said in an interview where, from discussions of people that have really read Humor more carefully than I have, like I've read Humor's book, Ethical Intuitionism, it's very apparent that Humor is often speaking in a way that doesn't, like, for instance, I had someone explicitly say, hey, look, you attributed this thing in Humor. Yes, Humor said that, but that's probably too distilled a view that oversimplifies what Humor really thinks. And then they hit me with a bunch of quotes from Humor that clarify. And then the view Humor held in the actual book, I was like, oh, okay, that's a lot more sophisticated, more reasonable. And so a lot of my characterizations of Humor are from hearing what Humor says, and I respond to it. But when philosophers write, they can often cash out and be more nuanced what they actually think in a way where the kinds of criticisms you would level at their remarks, once you understand the context for, like, the background views that they hold for why they're making them, they make a lot more sense. And so I think Humor's views are more defensible when you see them on paper than I think some of them have been in discussions. And specifically, I even have a blog post where I quoted Humor basically saying most people throughout history have been realists. But precisely, I don't know if Humor would just say that, yeah, I don't exactly think that, my views are a little more complicated, or whether Humor would say what specifically is meant by that is a little different than what I interpreted it to be. So that's one thing to keep in mind, which is that the characterization I'm giving is a kind of very superficial one that even a realist would say, look, there's a lot more to say about the critique of non-cognitivism, error theory, and relativism than merely that sort of superficial semantic analysis. The thing is, though, I've looked at a lot of what they say, and I don't think it gets much better than that personally, but it does take engaging with it quite a bit.
No, I understand. I understand what you're saying. Like, like basically you're saying I shouldn't make up my mind before I read all of their stuff. But I kind of disagree with that. But basically, it doesn't matter. I understand the point that, like, you shouldn't make up your mind based on just, like, a summary or whatever. Like, you should really get into the stuff.
You can make up your mind, just be provisional about it and recognize that you might be wrong. And sometimes you'll look, in some cases, a view is really, really absurd, and you could be fairly confident even from the outset that if you, like, look, take the flat Earth stuff. If is my channel going to get some problem if I mention flat Earth stuff?
No. I think there are other words that you shouldn't mention, but
don't mention anything
sure,
obviously
not
not seen or anything like that.
Not gonna mention.
Okay, cool. So Bigfoot. Okay, I don't think there's a very strong case for Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot is pretty not going to get on anybody's.
Bigfoot is fine.
Okay, Bigfoot. Right. So I'm already confident now that if someone's like, oh, but I'm a cryptozoologist and I have a bunch of evidence for Bigfoot, my honest attitude is that they're not going to have good evidence. They're just not. I think most of us probably have that attitude. But I'd also be perfectly willing to have a look at it. I actually saw an article that tried to make a case that, like, the existence of Bigfoot isn't that implausible. It was a pretty good article. And it actually made me think, maybe
who released this article?
I don't remember who it was. But it was like
okay,
surprisingly well argued that we shouldn't be that confident that Bigfoot doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Although I still
we don't know, right? With God, anything is possible, right?
Yeah. Anyway, but regarding arguments, like the actual arguments, not just stuff said on YouTube that realists make, they're taken very seriously. Most professional philosophers that responded to the Phil paper survey are moral realists. Moral realism, when people engage in a topic, it's a fairly common position, and I think people do take the argument seriously.
Well, right, okay, and I understand what you're saying, but like, what is the problem with me just saying, yeah, all those people are crazy? Like, whatever.
so
I'm just gonna make up my mind, and I'm gonna go against
there's
the majority or whatever. And so what?
there's
So
this
what?
thing called I remember reading in a book about it sometime. I think it's something like an identity constituting topic or something to that effect, right? Where people basically like tie their personal identity into this given thing, right? So religion is like a really good example of this, right? So if I say something like Islam is, put in whatever negative adjective you want here, right? A lot of Muslims are going to interpret that as Muslims are negative adjective, right? So if I say
Yeah, I
Islam
mean,
is
you couldn't even be an atheist on Lance's view,
what?
because most of people are religious.
No, that's not what Lance is saying.
Yeah,
Lance is saying, right? Lance is,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but basically he's saying you can make up your mind, right? But you just have to be a bit humble about it and not like insult and be derogatory towards other people because they're.
Well, you don't have to do anything. I'm just saying on
So
my
I
channel, I
have
don't
to
want
make
people.
up my mind, but I have to do it in a particular way. Like
just on his channel.
Yeah, you don't have to do anything.
yeah. I mean,
I'm just
on
look,
this
you
channel,
could- you could-
whatever he says goes, obviously. But I'm just saying, like in
Right,
my
right, right,
personal
look.
life, I don't give a shit how many like 60% said something or whatever. Like who gives a crap?
I'm gonna leave. It's a bit late here. Lance, I'd love to talk to you one-on-one at some point. I'll email you. And we'll
All right, that sounds great.
what's up.
Thanks for the talk, Antonio. Take care.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah. Talk to you
thanks
later,
for your
Antonio.
time.
Okay,
This is-
bye bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.
You know,
Okay,
I mean,
so
I don't
I
want to
wanna
make
move on
like
from
a big
this.
scene about
Yeah,
this,
let's-
but I'm
let's-
just saying that
we're
like
moving
if
on
I
from
have
it.
to
We're
make up
moving
my
on from it.
mind, I'm gonna make up my mind independently of surveys or whatever's, you know.
Okay.
Like,
Okay. All right, we're moving on. PKD, did you have more to say about price realism? Because I know you've been going around presenting price realism to people and getting reactions, right? Can you tell me about that?
That's right. Yeah, there are some people that were actually sympathetic to the view. They were like, sure, it's a value judgment, and those people are, realists. And they say, oh, yeah, sure, there could be stance independent price facts about how much something costs. And other people were like, well, my criticism to price realism is that price just seemed to be a construct. And I'm saying, well, seem to who, right? To a price realist, it wouldn't seem that way, right? So yeah, I'm curious to see, to present it in front of more people, in front of more realists, and to see what their reactions are, because I think I can mirror almost everything they say.
Yeah, I think so too. I want to build on the phenomenology too, because I think you're going to want to get your phenomenological ducks in a row as well. So I think when we examine things, if we look at certain things that like I don't know, certain things due to their aesthetic characteristics or other sorts of things, I actually have the sense that, for instance, I could buy a product and then regret it because I feel like I paid too much, as though the product has an intrinsic value that differs from the value I paid. In fact, it's worth less. I've had that experience. People have buyer's remorse all the time.
Exactly.
And look, if you think, for instance, that products are simply worth what people are willing to pay for them, like you have this very, capitalistic conception of value, where it's all supply and demand, you can just think, look, I don't care if there's so many of this product. It seems to me to be worth more, or I don't care if it's rare. It's not worth that much. And so there, simply willingness to buy or pay for a certain amount doesn't seem to always reflect our attitudes about the real value. So the real value seems to fall outside the scope even of various constructive accounts of its value. And so it's not simply like, so in other words, simply put, I'm saying I actually have, and I'm not joking, this is not a joke, I don't have moral realist phenomenology. I do kind of, and I don't even understand what the heck they're talking about. Because my moral values are a reflection of what I care about. They just are. And I don't even know what it would mean for something. And I don't think it's meaningful for something to be morally good or bad, independent of how much it seems that way to me or to you or from some standpoint. Price seems like a better candidate for that because I actually can resonate with that sentiment that, damn, I paid too much for this, or that thing really does seem like it should be worth more than that. I look at rubies and emeralds and stuff, and I think they look awesome. And like, yeah, they do look like they should be intrinsically more valuable than I don't know, just a piece of wood or something like that, a broken piece of plastic. And so I actually kind of get the idea of intrinsic price value. But
can you give an example
no
of something that you bought that you thought you paid too much for?
My house.
Your
Well,
house?
Lance,
Yeah,
it also
for sure.
Well, how would you know? Like, that is a one-time in lifetime purchase.
Yeah,
probably,
it's a strong
right?
price
intuition.
disagreement. We
Like,
have a
how would
price
you know-
disagreement here.
How would you know if that's too much or too little?
And as
or
we all
whatever?
know,
It feels like too much.
as
Feels
we
like
all
too
know,
much. And
disagreements are-
look, I'm just saying, I literally have that phenomenology that it feels like too much. And so I actually think, from my point of view, and of course, I'm not actually endorsing, like, I don't actually feel like there are objective price facts. What I'm saying is that I have some vague sense that prices don't track whatever kinds of constructive facts I could theorize about what their actual price is. And so I have some vague, fuzzy sense that things kind of feel like they have intrinsic monetary prices at times. And so that makes sense to me, and I'll bet you.
So
it
that's
seems
like
that way to a lot of-
phenomenal conservatism about prices, or what?
Not
We-
exactly, but I mean, you could make that point. You could say, look, all else being equal, if it seems to you that things have objective prices, then you're prima facie, you have some sort of defeasible justification for believing they have those prices in the absence of defeaters. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of great defeaters.
Well, yeah, I mean, what defeaters could there be? I mean, it's a subjective thing.
Well,
in
if
the
you
end,
make your
in the end of it.
epistemology internal and private for things that are not internal and private, you can get a lot of traction. Look, this is why I talk about epistemic blank checks. It only has to seem to me enough that something is true, and it can override any arguments and evidence to the contrary. You could just, and this is what the Morean shift is. You'll say any argument with premises that lead to the conclusion that moral realism is false are less plausible than moral realism being true. So I'm just going to reject all of them. Realists make this move all the time. They're not even remotely concerned about making it. They are perfectly happy to make it, and they're not ashamed or embarrassed to do so. So anyone can make this move about anything, assuming they sincerely have that phenomenology. And I don't see, the difference is that realists might just try to say, well, people don't do this for price stuff. They do it for realism. Oh, okay. So the position is true if enough people do it. So what if I use, what if a mad scientist or something, genetically engineers people or puts implants in people's brains for them to endorse price realism? And now there's a bunch of people that sincerely feel like price realism is true. Would that make it true? Would that be a good reason to think that it's true? I mean, sure, sorry, it wouldn't make it true, but would it be a good reason to think it's true? No. The number of people that feel a certain way is not particularly good evidence of something being true. So, and also, I think a lot of times realists are going to lean heavily on the presumption that most people share their phenomenology. That's an empirical question, and I don't think that it's true.
Incidentally,
Yeah.
PKD, was it right?
Yes.
I was just curious, so of the realists that you've talked to, how many of them were sympathetic to price realism?
I got
roughly.
3 of them to be sympathetic, but I presented it to
Well,
I
how
don't know,
many
like
did
5
you-
or 6
How
or
many
6
did you
people
speak
I
to?
talked about. 5 or 6. I mean, the position is just 3 days old, so
I'll give them
it
some
needs
time.
to grow a little bit. But when it comes to gastronomic realism, I've talked to, I don't know, maybe 50 realists, and let's say about 20 accepted gastronomic realism.
40?
Which, sure, fine.
40?
20.
What? Really?
20.
20 people out of 50 accept
Gastronomic
gastronomic
realism.
realism.
Because
Really?
how the dialectic would go
Wow.
is they'll attack me with the companions in guilt argument, right? And after I reject it,
well, okay.
they'll say,
I mean, I can't be sure about that, and I basically I have to believe you because you're presenting me this evidence, this data, but my
Well-
immediate reaction is that they're just like faking it. That they are that is just a debate move. Like they are just like debating you.
that they
you
don't
know?
actually believe it, but they
Yeah,
accept
they don't.
it
They
to stay
don't.
consistent.
No. But
Well-
like my reaction is nobody can fucking believe gastronomic realism. Like maybe you could find one person on planet
I
Earth
mean,
that believes
why, man? Like
gastronomic realism.
there are some cultures that have forbidden foods, so who knows? Maybe
Well,
there are people that
yeah,
genuinely
but
believe
what
the
does it
position.
have to be? Has to do with objectivism. Like, yeah, you can ban watermelons or whatever from Germany, and what does that have to do with realism?
Well, I
Nothing.
just don't think it's so implausible that people could sincerely endorse gastronomic realism or
Yeah.
price
Okay.
realism.
Well, whatever. That's just my opinion. Like, I don't
Sure.
know. I don't know. But
There have
that's
been
just
like
my reaction. That I think that like like persons on planet Earth would endorse
I think
gastronomic realism.
there have been like schools of thought that have believed in I mean, obviously I think I don't want to like be mean or anything like that, but I like idealism, skepticism, necessitarianism, I don't know, modal realism. Like there's like these whole class of positions in philosophy that I think are just like beyond the pale, right? But you have like very intelligent, very thoughtful people who believe them. I'm pretty sure like for gastronomic realism, I could be wrong, but I think there's like some versions of like moral naturalism that would be committed to some version of gastronomic realism, like natural law, like Aristotelian, like moral naturalist types. Those guys would probably have to be committed to something like that. Like if you think that like human nature is what determines like the standard dependent like normative facts, and there are some facts about like human beings that like there are some foods that are going to be gastronomically better than other ones, right? I mean, you're probably going to have to be committed to some form of like realism
Is
with
that
respect to it.
realism though? Like just because you think that some things are off limits or whatever, like what does that
Well,
have
it's
to
just
do
that
with?
there could be parallel, and PKD, maybe this is something you could do as well, is develop a parallel line to like Cornell realism for morality, like Cornell moral realism, and do Cornell price realism. And so a lot of naturalist accounts are going to drop some of the metaphysical baggage of non-naturalist realist accounts. I mean, that's part of the motivation. The naturalists want to have a respectable type of moral realism that doesn't have the non-natural elements, and so they want to construe the moral facts as supervening on or being constituted by certain types of natural facts. So, a very simplistic version might be that moral facts are facts about what increases or decreases well-being. There are facts about that, so there are moral facts. And if that account is largely grounded in a kind of analysis of ordinary moral language, and we find, yes, there are these reliable recurring patterns in the way that people speak and think about morality, and the best account of what they're doing is they're describing facts that are about what increases or decreases well-being. Boom, we've got this naturalist account that moral claims are just claims about increases or decreases in well-being, and there's our realism. Well, if it turns out that there are reliable recurring and systemic patterns in gastronomic evaluations or price evaluations, and there are these certain sorts of trackable facts in behind people's moral judgments and the way that not moral judgments, gastronomic or price judgments, and we could track those and offer a similar story that we would offer for the naturalist moral realist account, then we're going to be able to give naturalist gastronomic realist accounts too. And they're not going to look like the non-natural stuff. They're going to have different kinds of arguments. They're going to have a different kind of rationale. But I think you could do that for the gastronomic realist accounts. And for me, these are kind of doing the reverse dialectical role of a companions and guilt argument. And then PKD called them companions and innocence, where for me they serve as sort of reductio challenges. Like I don't think that they show moral realism is absurd. What I think they do show is that at the very least, a lot of the arguments that moral realists make for moral realism are pretty bad, because the same arguments at the very least can be made for positions that I think that the realist is not going to want to endorse. Alternatively, the realist could just endorse those other sorts of views, but I think once they do, again, there's a dialectic cost that they have to pay either way, as long as we're right about the degree to which these arguments parallel the realist arguments, which is that they either have to embrace views that I think a lot of people would find unattractive and silly, like price realism or gastronomic realism, or they're going to have to accept that a lot of their arguments for realism are not very good because they can also be used for these other sorts of things. So you either take the teeth out of a lot of realist arguments, or you get the realist to acknowledge that their position commits them to things that are pretty silly. And I think it's lose-lose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Maybe you should call it like Lance's horn or something like that.
Well, so I didn't invent this, so I don't want to take names for things. So the price realism, I didn't create that. That's somebody else. So I don't get to claim that one. But gastronomic realism, there's a paper on it from Don Loeb, and so I'm just using the arguments and points other people have made.
Yeah,
from my-
but it's kind of interesting to me, like what is the distinction between those? Like just like how you feel, like
Well,
with regards to food, you say, well, no, that doesn't seem like that would be a real thing. But then with regards to like moral actions or like altruism or whatever, then you say, oh yeah, that is real. Like just because people feel different, like what is the distinguishing factor there
exactly, and
between?
I want to
Yeah.
address that because me and David, Lance knows David from Discord. So there was a realist, and I was asking him, so you accept moral realism? Why do you reject price realism? What's the relative difference? What's the factor, right? That you could say I'm realist about this, but anti-realist about this one. And he just said, well, there are no different. There is no difference between those two facts. It's just my intuition, right? And then David said, well, if you cannot tell us what the relevant difference is, then we can conclude that your intuition is simply not reliable.
Yeah, that's
Because you
Well, yeah,
mentioned,
that seems like what you would have to conclude, because as long as they don't present a distinguishing attribute
factor.
or
That's right.
factor or whatever, like, then what the fuck? Like you could just apply this to anything, you know?
That's right. Yeah. And
No, I'm sorry to
also,
jump in here, but
go ahead, Griffin.
yeah, sorry, I didn't hear the whole explanation for price realism, but I might say something like price, like some like G.E. Moore style irreducibility argument. I don't know if you've heard this or not, and maybe
Yes.
this doesn't work, but there's nothing irreducible about price. Like when you think about the sort of value judgments you make about price, then you have to include moral, you have to include goodness, like as like a thing that already exists before you can make an argument about like whether you got a fair deal on the price of something. Like they seem to be distinctly different.
What's the relevant difference? I could say, look, like because I understand the critique. You say something like, for prices to exist, then humanity has to exist. But I've seen moral realists actually say something like that. Look, if humanity didn't exist, or if there were no any other sentient beings, then morality wouldn't exist as a real thing, because the conditions for
I would not.
But the conditions for this stance-independent moral facts to emerge, one of the conditions is that humans need to exist, or sentient people need to exist. So I could just make the same move there.
Well, I think, I maybe I would want you to. Could you explain the position one more time to me? I wasn't here when you went over it.
Yeah, sure. So price realism is basically the idea that prices of products and services are intrinsic to them and do not depend on our attitudes, preferences, appraisals. We often hear people say that some things are expensive, and while other things being cheap. We see that prices are also action guiding. People seek to buy things that comfort their budget. There is price disagreement also.
I just want to say that, like, as crazy as that sounds, like, to me that sounds crazy, that there are intrinsic values to objects. I think that actually makes more sense than with actions, like with morality,
with state of
because
affairs.
yeah, well, because you have to like draw resources from the earth to create objects and blah blah blah. And if you tax that, let's say, or whatever, like there is some value to the resources, the raw resources that you draw from the earth, more so than like actions such as like lying. Oh, I lied to you. Oh, okay. it said like in the clouds it said that lying is bad or something. Like, where does it say that? So even like the price realism that I think you are using as a parody of the morality argument, I think makes more sense than
Yeah,
the
just to be
morality thing.
clear, I don't actually think that it makes more sense. I think that it has certain features that resonate more with me than realism, but that might just be me. What I would say though is that in the case of prices, I think we could tell a much more clear and straightforward sort of a genealogical account of how and why people would judge things to have the prices that they have. Whereas I think it's a lot more inscrutable and difficult for morality. And so that at least I think could readily count in favor of moral realism being a more defensible view than price realism, just because I mean, look, if we really wanted to take down price realism, I think we could. I don't think it has like a lot more going for it than moral realism.
Wait,
I don't think.
can you explain that one more time? Why does it
Sure,
make
sure,
more
sure.
sense to you than the
Yeah.
moral?
So if someone were to say, well, why is it that people would have the kinds of price evaluations and price judgments that they have? I think that we could, if we worked on it, tell a story about that. And that story, I think, could end up being grounded in certain sorts of facts about people's desires and goals and cultural norms and constructive norms and that sort of thing. And like the sense that a thing is really worth more than you paid for it. I think we could account for that psychologically without positing price facts. And so I think we could, and again, I haven't done this because I don't even think there'd be much of a point.
Well, but behavior couldn't.
Well, what I'm saying is I think we could offer a pretty good psychological debunking argument of supposed price realism intuitions were anyone to have them in a way that I think it's much harder to do for moral realism.
Really? Okay. Well, I guess I mean I don't want to press this too much. Like I don't want to start a debate here, but to me it seems like to me it seems like almost they are equivalent. Like how do, what you pay for stuff is how you behave in a sense.
That's not really what I'm talking about. Just from looking at them, I think it's moral realism. I think getting to the point where it strikes me as super implausible takes more work than dismissing price realism. And another thing price realism doesn't have going for it is that it doesn't really have proponents. So I don't take the fact that lots of moral realists take moral realism seriously to be not indicative of anything. And the people that are proponents of moral realism are often really well-informed, smart people that have done a lot of work. And so I think that counts for something. I just don't take that to be decisive, and I don't take it to be super compelling. But again, I think that for me to reject that, I think there's some onus on me to explain why. Like if a majority of people that have opted to make it their professional business to talk about a topic disagree with me, I need to have a pretty good reason why I don't think that they're right. And I don't have to do that for price realism. So that also counts in favor of moral realism.
Okay,
I just don't think
they count
that much. Yeah, I don't think that they count that much. So I wouldn't want to push the price realism thing too hard, just because I think the sense that most of us would have in reacting to it, which is that's silly. Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. It is silly. It's not going to turn out to be defensible. At least that's what I think. But the point is that, okay, well, if you have that sense, why don't we have that sense for morality? And I think that we could get to a point in society where I think we might view morality that way. I mean, here's another thing that prices have going for them. Prices are like a legitimate, like omnicultural characteristic. Like every society barters and trades and has prices for things. I don't know that they all have money, but like money arose probably before anybody ever mentioned morality, at least on my view about what morality is. And so prices have been around longer. Prices are in every culture. I'm not convinced morality is in every culture. And in that sense, I think morality is more culturally contingent than price. So now I'm arguing against myself. Here's actually a case you could make for the cultural contingency of distinctively moral thinking in a way that I don't think price is as culturally contingent. I think it's going to be a human universal. And so in that respect, if we're going to say, hey, if a certain distinct way of thinking is culturally idiosyncratic and it only arises in some cultures, that's an indication that it's not something we're naturally disposed to think in terms of. And we are disposed to think in terms of price, or at least more plausibly than we are in terms of morality. And so that's an argument against morality. So What's
Right.
what's really to me disturbing about the price realism moral realism comparison is that price realism actually has some advantages as a realist account over moral realism. It's not just on an equal playing field. It has some advantages, probably some disadvantages. Maybe the disadvantages outweigh the advantages, but like there are problems here. I think for realists, moral realists, is that look ultimately I think the reason moral realism seems more plausible to people is because they find it intuitive, and because other people find it intuitive. And if there weren't a lot of, I think people would dismiss it as really, really silly in the same way they would price realism.
Yeah, I think like I don't know, like I think I was saying something similar to that like the prices make more sense than the morality. But like just in general, I think that like people should just like try to understand what they are part of. Like they are part of a particular environment, you know, and which is like a society, let's call it, and that has particular rules, and you will, you know, feel bad, you will feel shame if you go against those rules, or you know. So like there is nothing like crazy or inexplainable about these things. Like you can explain these things rather straightforwardly in just naturalistic, straightforward terms. And so that's why I find this moral realism so you know, unappealing.
I might want to jump in real quick. I don't think I stated my question perfectly, you know, in a nice way, but I don't think you can have price realism without having moral realism, and I wouldn't necessarily, you know, I don't think I wouldn't necessarily negate price realism. I think that there is a, you know, there's a way to conceive of it, like, you know, charging someone, you know, more than what, you know, the going rate is, or the going rate might be, you know, there's some like, you know, reason why there's some like moral reason, you know, it's fair, or it's, you know, it's the going rate, and there might be some objective reason, some objective moral reason you could say for having a price be where it is. And that wouldn't, I don't know, that doesn't seem to me like that has anything to do with price realism. It has more to do with moral realism, and I don't think you can have one without the other.
So
Wait, well, if
you
you had moral realism, which is like don't bullshit the other, like that was a like moral truth or whatever, like you know, something that you would have to do, well then obviously you couldn't charge them more than the item was actually worth. Like if you did that, then that you would go against the moral realism thing. So in that sense, yeah,
Well, you
they
could
would be
charge them
connected.
more. You could charge them more, but then you would just be wrong.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
Well, okay, but if you can just be wrong, then who the fuck cares about this anyway?
no,
Well,
like I think that's just misunderstanding what he's saying. I think
and maybe
Griffin,
it is. That might be the case, and I'm willing to.
No, not you, Griffin. I think that
Oh.
maybe I'm confused, right? But like, let me just clarify what I think you're saying. What I think you're saying is that the distinction between price realism, moral realism, is that price realism is contingent on moral realism being true, but
Yeah.
it's not the true vice versa, right? So
Yeah.
that's like the symmetry breaker. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Pretty
Well,
much.
yeah, I was saying exactly that price realism would be dependent on moral realism being true.
That's why I run them as companions in innocence type of arguments. So if you believe moral realism, then, you know, maybe you could accept price realism as
Yeah,
well.
and I would say I probably could accept price realism. And
But why can't the price like stance independent facts be like what's the term sui generis? Like it just could be like its own like autonomous domain.
well, because like price isn't some like irreducible fact of the world in the same way that goodness is.
If it's just a price that's real, but there is no moral component to it, then you could just charge double the fucking price and whatever. Who cares? Like
Yeah, this is this is where I think you're going to get some big differences, because at least for Morean conception, like non-naturalist realist conceptions of morality, a lot of the relevant terms are going to be primitive, unanalyzable, properly basic, irreducible, that sort of thing. And I think that you could try to make that parallel case for prices, but it's going to be really strained and not very plausible. It's just not going to be plausible for it to not come down to some naturalistic reduction where you say, look, the price of the car is like can be cashed out in terms of the amount of some resource that is offered in exchange for it or something like that, whether it be cash or credit cards or bartering.
Can't you just sum it up by, if you don't have to charge the price that the item is actually worth, then you can do whatever. Like that.
I don't know that that's going to get rid of this problem, though. So there's just going to be this sort of asymmetry where, at least on a non-naturalist view, morality as a concept and as a normative domain seems, on that view, to resist naturalization in a way that I think price doesn't. And so you could get something quite interesting, which is that a person could say, look, I'm a non-naturalist realist about morality, but I'm actually a naturalist realist about price, which would be a cool view.
I don't think I'm understanding you. Like, if there is no morality, no moral realism, as in like you have to, pay the exact amount for the item of what it's actually worth, or you're not supposed to, charge people more than what the item's worth. If that doesn't apply, then how can monetary realism apply?
I'm not sure if that addresses anything that Lance
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think I was tracking what Lance is initially saying, right?
So he was saying that the objection could be that a non-naturalist moral realist could say that he is non-naturalist about morality, but he's naturalist about prices, and both positions could be realist.
That's exactly what I'm asking. How could he be?
What's the?
If there is no imperative to charge exactly the price that the item is actually worth, then how could there be a monetary realism?
So if you're a naturalist, you don't have to think that the stance-independent price facts are irreducibly normative.
It just make you happy.
At least you don't have to think that they're authoritative. So you could say, look, the stance-independent price facts are facts about if you cash out in terms of some natural
watermelon is exactly $2. That is like a truth about the universe.
They're going to they could just end up being a certain kind of descriptive fact.
Okay.
And so if that's the case, you're really not going to have an issue. And also, there's nothing about a non-naturalist view towards morality requires you to be a non-naturalist about literally everything. It's not like non-naturalist moral realists are non-naturalists.
Okay. I mean,
so there's no inconsistency. Basically, what I'm saying is
having a bit of trouble to divorce myself from the imperative.
Sure. Naturalists are just going to drop some of that stuff, or at least they can drop some of that stuff. They just are going to say, morality doesn't have all the features that
this is just the way it is, but you can do whatever, Okay.
And so you could, for instance, if you were an analytic naturalist about price, and you think price is the amount of money that it would be worth under some specifiable naturalist, like some set of natural facts, like the price that would optimize your well-being or something. That's not very plausible, but whatever. Then you could say, well, there are facts about the price you could pay that would optimize your well-being. So we're done. That is the price fact. And it'd be a little weird to call it a normative fact, but if it's weird to do that, then it's also weird to call naturalist moral facts normative facts.
Well, I mean,
they're not authoritative.
To me, it seems like the only point of this whole endeavor is to make it normative. Like if you're just describing things, then it's well.
Sure, take that up with naturalist realists. So
I know. Well, I am an anti-realist. Which whatever. Well, okay.
Right. A lot of this is very rock paper scissors. where like anti-realists and non-naturalist realists could readily agree that there's one of the problems with naturalist realist accounts is that they're like dropping the authoritativeness, the practical clout, the oomph, the that the sort of things that non-naturalists want to keep. And they could say, look, the kinds of account you're giving is trivial. It's goofy. And
wait,
that is
who
like,
can agree? Who can agree with that on
realists, non-naturalist realists, and anti-realists. So Parfit raises objections against naturalism that I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sympathetic to Parfit's objections. But then I could turn around and look at the naturalist objections to the non-naturalist account and say, well, a lot of them might go in for some type of semantic thesis or metaphysical stuff. I'm not going to buy into, but like most anti-realists would. And so what's interesting about the dynamic of that Phil paper survey is you see 62% realists, 26% anti-realists. And then non-naturalist realists will point to that and go, look, it's 62% realists. We got you, you anti-realists. We outnumber you more than 2-1. You're a bunch of losers. We're the best. We win, and we're going to stomp all over you because we're in the majority. The problem is that if you look at the breakdown, because the Phil paper survey has another question about whether they're naturalists or non-naturalists about realism, a slightly larger number of the realists are naturalists than there are non-naturalists. So that's 62%. It's actually like the number of naturalist realists. I don't remember what the number is, but it's less than 31%. So let's say it's like 28% or something like that. In fact, I think I've seen the number, and the number is, I think it might be like 26 point something percent of, like, I think the actual exact number of anti-realists is 26.1, and the number of non-naturalist realists is like 26.8 or something like that. So there are actually only about as many non-naturalist moral realists as there are anti-realists. And so non-naturalists are in no position to claim that there's some kind of majority. And their view is very, very different from naturalist realist positions. And so what we really have, because imagine you ask the question this way, which position is correct? Non-naturalist realism, naturalist realism, anti-realism. What you would actually get is something like 27% non-naturalist realist, 26% anti-realist, and then like 32%.
Wait, like 26% would be anti-realist from professors who are teaching and studying ethics?
No. So the survey was sent out to people based on a number of criteria, like which universities they're at, whether they have certain kinds of publications. I don't know all the criteria offhand. So there are a number. Basically, you have to be a like professional philosopher, and there are a number of criteria you could meet in order to qualify to be a respondent to the survey. I don't know what they are.
So did you qualify, for example?
Not at the time, not to my knowledge. I was
but
not.
But you would have if you had your PhD at the time they did.
Probably, yes. Survey. That would have probably been enough. If I had had more publications in philosophy journals, that might have also qualified me. I'm not entirely sure. I just don't know. I haven't looked too carefully into the criteria. I don't know if they're all public. They probably are, because that'd be a weird thing to not make public. But yeah, they have some criteria. The respondents are mostly analytic philosophers. There are some continental philosophers and other philosophers in there, but it's mostly analytic. The original survey, I believe, with respect to the realism question, it was 1,785 respondents. That might have been the actual number for the whole survey. When I give that 62% of realists versus 26%, that's for all of the respondents to the survey that opted into answering the question. Also notice that doesn't add up to 100% because people chose other things besides that. That's philosophy survey, so they're going to make it complicated.
What do you mean?
The other thing
what did they choose?
You often have options like other, and you have options like a combination of both, or other sorts of things. We could pull it up and look. I'm not going to do that now, but you have other options besides. So if they ask like, do you endorse A or not A? Often you actually have the option of I endorse both, or I endorse neither, or I endorse something else. So you do typically have like a whole bunch of other options, and I think that made up something like 14%.
Okay, well, hold on. Like, it doesn't matter so much how many in total there were, but like what percentage of all philosophy professors did take part in the survey?
So it's hard to get a good read on the number of professional philosophers. Like if you want to look at the number of people that publish in philosophy or have PhDs in philosophy, it's going to be in the tens of thousands. So like you could look at what the APA says in the US for like the number of PhDs in philosophy produced every year. I think it's a few hundred. And so you just do the math and it estimate like the age people are at when they get a PhD, and then
So it's
on
like
average life
really few, like under 10%.
It's very likely to be a few tens of thousands of people. I don't know if it goes higher than 100,000. And then I'm making a even cruder estimate based off like just the U.S. data. I don't have the data on hand, so I'm going off of a lot of conjecture here. But a few tens of thousands would be reasonable. As far as the respondents to the survey, let's say it's 50,000, and you had about 2,000 responding to the survey. Then you're going to get whatever that percentage is. I can't even do math anymore. What is that, 4%? Something like that.
Yeah, really low percentage.
Well, so that's not that big of a problem. 4% of an entire population would actually be a ridiculous amount. Like, what's the current population in the U.S.? Current U.S. population?
Like 400 million?
30,
it's probably less than that. I see 330.
330 million or something like that.
Yeah, what is 4% of 330 million?
Uh,
Okay, so
I don't
imagine
know.
you did a survey where you surveyed 13,200,000 people.
That's
Would
insane.
if I surveyed 13 million people, would you say I did too small of a survey?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a relative question, right? Like compared
not
to
good.
other
So-
surveys, it may be good, but like, is
true. That's
it
true.
representative? Is the question?
Okay, you're right about all of that. It is relative in certain respects. The question is like depending on the kind of effect size and what kinds of data you're looking at, different samples of a population are going to be better or worse for estimating certain sorts of effects. Any effect that is actually like significant and would land on your radar, 13 million people is outrageous. It's
Okay.
The diminishing returns you would get even after a few thousand people would make it nowhere near worth it. You wouldn't even need to survey 100,000 people. You wouldn't need to. A few thousand people is actually, for most effects you would want to observe in a population, a few thousand people for the US is actually perfectly fine. Like 3,000 or 4,000 is actually a pretty good sample. Now, of course, it could be if your sample size is so small, you're going to have significant problems. But it's really like the amount of survey respondents they had for the Phil paper survey is probably actually quite good. It's probably more than you need to make like reasonably decent.
Wait, hold on. Like at this point, I'm like even forgetting what we're talking about. Like,
I was
what are
talking
we
about
surveying?
respondents to the Phil paper survey.
Respondents to the Phil survey.
Yeah, and that's everybody in
Yeah.
philosophy. If you go to the page, like the Phil paper survey paper, you could just put in 2020 Phil paper survey in Google. You'll find the survey. That's all.
So these were just like philosophy teachers, or like professors.
Again, I don't know the exact criteria. It's not necessarily a professor because you could be an instructor and not be a professor. You could be a postdoc and not be a professor.
Part-time, but at
Sure.
least some like
we could say professional philosophers. That's what it's
yeah,
comprised
okay,
of.
okay.
It would be like really weird, for instance, if they excluded somebody. Like at this point, especially if I have a few more publications, it would be weird to exclude me, even if I don't have a PhD in philosophy. So
yeah,
it would be weird.
Then I don't understand why you weren't included, because like even if you didn't have the PhD, you still had your position as well, I don't know what it was.
Well, graduate student in a psychology program isn't going to qualify me.
Or something.
Nah,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily. Whatever. I don't know the criteria, and maybe I did qualify and they didn't send it to me. In any case, it's not bad data. It's pretty good data. Anyway,
Okay.
that's giving you the percentage for all philosophers that responded to the question. And some philosophers didn't always respond to every question. They skipped some of them. But if you focus on just the people that purport to specialize in metaethics, I believe the sample size then shifts to 228 respondents. In fact, what the heck? Let's just look it up. 2020 Phil paper survey. Let's do it. I think it's 228.
Well, I would assume, before you tell me, that of the ethics department, there would be like 95% realist.
No,
versus like
it's way too high.
No, it's not. It hardly changes at all. If you look at specialists in, also, I mean, there aren't typically ethics departments. Typically, moral philosophers are going to just be housed in a standard philosophy department. And also, they're not like ethics would include normative ethics, applied ethics, biomedical ethics, various like categories, subcategories of applied ethics, like business ethics, that sort of thing. There are people that focus on business ethics. They don't do meta ethics. And so meta ethics is its sort of own specialization. A person that's really
those are the ones
focused on
that are
ethics.
creating the fake ads for like mobile games or what? Like what are those people doing? Like
They're addressing ethical issues in business. They're not creating fake ads. I don't know.
Also,
what you're
also,
talking about.
incidentally, I could be wrong on this, but I don't think there was a single question in the Phil paper survey that garnered like 95% support. Like even external world skepticism, I think only got like 87% agreement or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
don't know. I don't remember. But okay, so I'm looking at area of specialization, meta ethics. Let's see what we get. Okay, so accept or lean towards more realism bumps up to 65.35%. And the response, I got it right, 228. So 228 of the respondents to that survey were specialists in meta ethics and answered that question. When you just focus on their answers, the realist rate bumps up to 65%, so it's about 2/3. And let's see what happens to anti-realism. It barely changes. It goes down to 25.9%. So it doesn't change a whole lot. If you look at philosophers in general or specialists, it's basically the same number. That's likely to be within or close to the sort of margin of error for these measures. So it's not particularly informative.
Interesting.
Basically, it's about 2/3 are realists and about 1/4 are anti-realists. And that doesn't change when you look at specialists. But note that that's only 228 people. And that's not a huge number. And I think that makes up about 13% of the respondents. And so if we say very roughly that there's 50,000 philosophers, then what is that? 13% of 50,000. That's how many meta-ethicists there might be. So we're talking a few thousand people. We're not talking a very large community. And we are talking an extremely homogenous community in terms of training, education, discipline. Like, if I see people publishing in meta ethics, it won't be surprising to see if they were specifically at like Boulder or they were at like UNC Chapel Hill. So they're going to be at like specific universities are more likely to produce major publishing people that are taking realist and anti-realist stances. And so you have a pretty small, functionally rather small community of people that are working on these issues. And I think that's a big problem if it turns out that they're wrong, that most people are moral realists.
Well, of course they're wrong. I mean, we know that.
Well, I think it's a tough call. For me, arriving at the view that most people aren't moral realists took quite a bit of work. And so I don't think it's that easy to get to that point.
Well,
so I'm talking about the empirical claim. Are most people moral realists? I think the answer is no. But that's not an easy case to make, not at all.
No. I'm not talking about most people. I'm just talking about like what is actually true is obviously like moral realism is false.
Oh, sure. I'm just talking about the empirical claim about whether people are moral realists or not.
Oh, well, I wouldn't know anything about that. Like I wouldn't even make a claim. Like I don't know.
Sure, but there is empirical research on this, and what's a little frustrating about it is that moral realists routinely will say most people have realist intuitions, or most people are realists, or most people speak or think like realists.
Oh, yeah.
And I take those to be empirical claims, and the empirical data just doesn't support that. It just doesn't support that.
So you can look at one thing I wanted to debate you on, but then I heard you address the point is that you don't think that believing in religion necessarily makes you a moral realist. Like believing that God wants to do something or whatever doesn't necessarily make you a moral realist. Which at that point, I mean, after you said that, I understood. Okay, I understand why you said that. That most people are not necessarily moral realists. I still kind of find it hard to believe because, like, what the fuck do you have religion for if you don't think that is objectively the correct thing to do, to worship your God and stuff like that? Like, if it's just another opinion, then you could do something else, with your time.
So I've pointed out, just to chime in, I've pointed out to Lance before that awful lot of religions seem to threaten people with hell if they don't do what God tells them to, and they promise people heaven if
that makes sense.
That
would make it that will make it like self-centered, right? Like I'm gonna follow the God just so he doesn't send me to hell.
I should note that the Phil paper survey, you could also look at correlations between responses, and I think about 15% of the theists are anti-realists as well, which I think is interesting. So it's
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, so there's that. Also, J Mike just added in the comments, you could filter by faculty, PhD, undergrad, no background. And so I'm looking at it now, and you certainly can. So you can go by regions, and so you could look at like just the United States. So for instance, I'm going to look at realism just in the United States, and it bumps up to 72% are realists. Oh, for
Wow.
specialists in meta ethics. So let me go to all respondents in the United States. Okay, so it's 66.67%. So it looks like it's exactly 1/3. That's really weird. But you could also go by whether they have a PhD. So let's see. If you go for PhD, then it bumps up to 65.7%. And then I'm going to go for PhD and specialist in meta ethics. So this is specifically people with PhDs that specialize in meta ethics. And let's go for all regions. And then it's 65.35%. So it doesn't really change very much. And then let's say
Yeah. You're so nuanced, Lance. Like for me, it's just I'm so cynical. I just think that like all PhDs in ethics are obviously like realists because, well, why the fuck would I study something that's not real? And then all the religious people are like, yeah, obviously it's also real. But you draw these nuances, and it's like at that point, like, what do you even know?
Sure, but that's super important to do. Sorry, someone wanted to jump in.
Yeah, it's just if I'm understanding you correctly, I think I vehemently disagree with what you're saying. Even if you think that like a particular subject matter is just like riddled with errors and like falsehoods, that means that you might still find that like subject like interesting and like worthwhile to study, right? So for example, I really like philosophy of religion, right? I like reading about it, talking about it, like talking about it with other people. Even though I think that the idea of God, I mean, has a lot of problems with it. And I don't think that like any like sort of like orthodox conception of God is like remotely accurate or even true. I still think that it's like important to talk about. And
No, I understand that point, but in the aggregate, I would think that like 90% of people that study a particular topic would think that like the topic has some substance to it, and it's not just like a social construct or something like that. Like that's just my opinion, you know.
Yeah, that's fine, but I mean, I don't think those two things are necessarily like mutually exclusive, right? You can take something as like a social construct and think it still has like substance and like impact and value, right? So, for example, like money is like a great example of this, right? Money is a
Yeah.
complete social construct, right? Like
Yeah.
like if everyone collectively tomorrow decided that like I don't know the pound didn't have any value, it would have no value, right? Its value basically derives from us saying that it has value, but it's still like something that is like very useful.
Right, we're
like,
still gonna have economists, yes.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right. So I think that like maybe like even in spite of the fact that like atheism is true, right? You could still like sort of think, okay, well, what does religion look like now, in spite of the fact that we live in like a godless universe without any sort of like transcendent purpose? I think that's like a very interesting question.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and I am asking myself right now, like, is there a difference between, like, let's say, money, which is studied through economy, and like religion, which is studied through, let's say, like, well, whatever, religious studies, or morality, which is studied through ethics? Like, do you is there like a different assumption like made that like well, for money, that it doesn't have to be true, we just agree that money exists and whatever, social construct, but then
Right.
I would have
with
thought. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, well, you understand what I'm saying, but then with like ethics, it's like, well, do we have to pretend that this thing like really exists? Like we can't just make it a social construct, you know, to make it like a real subject of study, you know, like kind of like that. Well, anyway, maybe you don't understand what I'm saying, but that is like what I'm asking myself, like why well, basically, actually, the thing that I'm asking myself is, why would anyone ever study fucking ethics? Like it
Um,
just doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, I
Well,
can think of like a lot of reasons as to why someone might study ethics, right? One would be that like presumably, I think the question you asked him is like, if you're like a moral anti-realist and you don't think there's like some objective like factor that matters.
Well,
to
yeah,
what,
you
like,
kind of understand that. Oh, yeah, you adopt the behavior from your tribe, let's call it, and if you were in a different situation, then you would adopt some different set of rules and behaviors. And so, what are you studying? Like, what are you doing?
um, I I don't know if you're saying what I think you're saying, but I've never really understood this like complaint that like, oh, like if you lived in like some completely different time and lived in a completely different life, you'd have a completely different set of values. My answer to that is just like, so what? Like, who cares? I care about the values I have right now, and I think that when it comes to like with respect to like studying ethics as like an anti-realist, I think that like there are like concerns that I have, right? So for example, I'm going to care about I don't know, let's say like there's like two civil liberties that I care about, right? Say privacy and say security, right? And I'm trying to think,
Free
okay, what?
speech, maybe? I don't
Yeah,
know.
like just pick whatever like social issue that you care about, right? And there's like two conflicting norms that I have, right? I think, okay, well, which one of these do I prefer? What are the empirical trade-off? Like, which one of these like best promotes this particular way of life? Is this one going to cause like net harm, net utility? Like, there's like interesting ways to talk about these discussions, right? And I don't really think that like the truth of moral realism, moral anti-realism, right, really adds anything to the discussion, right? I think Lance has talked about this before, but you can have like two people, like one person could be a moral realist and one person could be a moral anti-realist, and they could have the exact same like
Yeah.
normative positions, right? They could agree pretty much on gay marriage. They could agree about drugs. They could agree about like liberalism. They could agree about every single thing, like down to the letter, right? But they could have completely dissimilar like meta-ethical frameworks, right? So I
Yeah,
don't really.
that makes sense to me what you're saying, but it almost like sounds to me like you could do that on this like in your free time or something. Like
Um,
you don't need to devote your career to that. Like,
I
yeah,
think now you're just sort of like interested as to like why people have like the particular psychology they do, and that's just like I mean I couldn't really be able to like give
yeah,
you like any sort of good
yeah,
answer
yeah.
to
I
that.
could ask the same question about like chemists or whatever. Like, what why the fuck are you doing this? Yeah,
I mean,
it's fair enough, like, yeah, but it's just that like, well, I guess where this line of thinking comes from is that I was thinking that all of these realists come from, well, I study something real, you know like that's why there is this predominance of realists in terms of ethics or morality, but maybe that is a little bit too cynical or a little bit too like easy solution for why they exist, so maybe, yeah.
Right.
I might jump in.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick before you do that, I'm gonna have to go soon because I'm gonna have to have dinner at some point. So we'll probably
Yeah, I
wrap
have a
up
question I would.
pretty soon, within like 10-15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So with regard to the fill paper surveys, I know you talked about how you have talked about deliberative indispensability before, and I'm not here to defend its like truth trackingness, but I would say that it does give, I think, a pretty good explanation as to why most people, or why it seems like at least, or why you might think that it seems like at least most people hold moral realist beliefs.
How does it do that?
Well, I mean, because I'm not if everyone knows what it is, but I think it's Enoch. But he says basically, having basic objective normative justification is necessary for making decisions or deliberating or having conversations or basically just like making actions or doing actions. And because we need to rely on something, or we need to rely on something objective in order to make these sorts of
Wait,
decisions.
who is saying we need to rely on something objective to have
Enoch.
moral?
David Enoch. Well, basically
David
the
Enoch.
idea is if we don't posit this, which we don't have to, it's not a proof of moral realism. But if we don't, then we fall into a really, really sort of arbitrary system. In basically all of our beliefs.
Well,
And
I
then
would
Yeah,
disagree
it
with
becomes
that,
really
but I guess
impossible.
I'm not the one that's being asked, so I'm just gonna mute
yeah.
myself.
So the Enoch thing, I'm just going to end up having problems with that argument when it gets down to like the goal of deliberation is to minimize arbitrariness. It gets really obscure to me. I'm not sure what exactly like is it like if so my goal when I'm trying to decide what to eat at a restaurant, holding things like nutrition and cost and other things out of the picture. I want to eat the food I want to eat. And if someone like are my food preferences arbitrary? In a certain sense, they are. The fact that I prefer vanilla to chocolate, you know, it's arbitrary in a certain sense. But I don't think that's a type of arbitrariness I'm seeking to minimize when making culinary decisions. And I think it's the same thing for my moral values. If someone says, "Hey, the fact that you don't want there to be lots of suffering, rather than for there to be lots of suffering, is arbitrary on an anti-realist perspective," okay, well, that's not a type of arbitrariness I have any interest in minimizing. I don't care. And so part of I just don't buy into this idea that you need to have these sort of objective standards when you're deliberating. I don't have them. Like I can introspect. Like, look, if realists can introspect and have all these realist intuitions, when I introspect, I don't have any of this stuff where I feel like I'm deliberating about facts. I don't think I have to do any of that. So the account doesn't resonate with me at all. If it's supposed to be, if it's intended to, or someone tried to use it as a descriptive account of how people reason, I'd say they need to put their empirical money where their mouth is and actually show that people reason with that in mind. I don't think they do. So
Maybe it's like objective, correct thing to reason about what you're gonna do. So like maybe you're like as an objective realist thinking about what you're doing is exactly the thing that you're supposed to be doing, like maybe
I'm
that's
not,
the
yeah, not so sure. I think the argument becomes pretty convincing with regard, not necessarily with, gastronomic realism or whatever, but with epistemic realism and basic epistemic justification, and the fact that everyone relies on it, and that I feel like that's
But isn't that like
when we think about when we're even having an argument or having a conversation to begin with, we're trying to use logic. We're trying to use stance independent. Like we're just using these things.
no
If we
people
didn't
are
use these
having
things,
arguments all of the time where they're not using logic
well, they're
with
trying to, or they're appealing to, right?
But
no,
I did.
where
So
they're just like trying to influence what each
Yeah, but
other,
they're
like
using logic with like what would best influence this person. Like there's a logical sequence that is occurring that isn't arbitrary. And if it was arbitrary, then they wouldn't. There's no reason they would use that versus another. And then I think it really becomes sort of absurd at some point.
So what I don't grant is that the epistemic norms and norms or principles of logic are stance independent and irreducibly normative. I'm not granting that I construe them in a realist way, even if I do employ them. You could always frame them in terms of, look, I have certain sorts of conversational goals. If those goals are to accurately model the world in terms of making accurate predictions and all of that, I can cash that out without taking epistemic norms or logic to be or to involve or to any way imply irreducibly normative considerations. I don't think when I'm deliberating and employing epistemic norms that I ought to employ those norms even if I didn't want to. I employ them because I want to. And I employ precisely the norms that I think are going to reliably allow me to achieve my goals. There is, and for me, the epistemic norms are, in a certain sense, rolled up into and constituted by, and in a certain sense, you could say subordinate to my goals. I don't like try to figure out what's true independently of it serving my goals. My epistemic practices are actually employed because I take them to be in pursuit of my goals.
well, I
And
mean,
so I think
if you just think of a simple example, like let's say you and your significant other or your girlfriend or whatever, your wife, want to watch a movie, like there is no truth about
I
what
wouldn't claim
movie
that. I think
you have to watch. Like maybe you want them to watch your favorite film and you tell them, well, let's watch this fucking film because like I love this film. and they say, well, but like this is a genre that I don't really like, and there is no truth to the matter. It's just going to end up being more like
I just think these are really trivial examples. I think like with regard to like why should I follow my preferences? Like you should follow your preferences. Like these are all
well, but these are
something that's
most of the things that we have to choose.
No,
That
but
is
that's
Well,
like
just to
not
be clear,
going to be
I don't
relevant.
think I should follow my preferences. I don't even think the question makes sense.
well then that's I feel like you just
Like, what
I
would the
feel like
alternative
that
be?
just ends in an absurd conclusion. I don't know. Maybe that's
What's
just,
the absurd conclusion? Like I just do act in accordance with my preferences, and when I'm
like,
reasoning
but
about what
why
to
do you? Because you've no. It's I don't know.
Because
It
you
seems like
want
you're
to.
following this stance.
Because
Yeah,
you
but-
want to, and there is nothing in your way.
But you
That's
do.
why
But
you
it's
do it.
I don't know. I'm not
I want
convinced
to
by
hold
that.
on. I want to hear the concern from Griff directly. So, what would be the concern?
I'm concerned. I'm like, there's a reason that everyone follows their preferences, right? There's a reason why when we say, well, I don't follow my preferences, maybe they're not they're not universal or whatever, but they do, and everyone does, and everyone uses this basic epistemic justification.
Hold on.
Even
what
in saying that I should follow my preferences or saying that,
but I don't say that I should follow my preferences. I don't say that.
why should you not say that you should
Because you just don't do
I-
that.
so here's how-
that's
here-
not
when I
how you
reason-
live.
you have no
When
reason
I
to
reason-
you have no reason to.
There's so many people trying to talk at once.
I'm sorry.
When I'm trying to figure out what to do, like I want to have a glass of water, right? I have a preference. I want to fulfill the preference, and so I act accordingly. I don't think that I ought to follow my preferences. My preferences are just facts about my goals, and then I act consistently with my goals. That's what I'm motivated to do. Those are descriptive facts. I don't think that there's some further fact. Like, for instance, I don't think I need justifications for my preferences. So I prefer, I like peanut butter. I don't think that if someone says, well, what's your justification for liking peanut butter? I would almost see that as a kind of category mistake. It's just a descriptive fact about me that I like peanut butter.
Does I like
not,
peanut butter entail I ought to eat peanut butter?
No. So
Then why
I'm
do you
a
eat peanut butter?
eliminativist. Well, because I want to.
Why would it
should you act on what
entail?
you want to do?
You
But
have
see, you're
to
saying
eat
you're
it.
saying why should I? And I don't think that the question makes sense. So for me, normative discourse can always be reduced in principle to consistency relations between means and ends, between goals and means of acting consistently with those goals. And so if it's a fact about me that I have the goal of eating peanut butter, then it is also a fact that eating peanut butter would be consistent with the goal. I don't think there are further facts. That's the whole point of my, behind why I say, I've sometimes said I'm a normative eliminativist. I literally do not believe that there are irreducibly normative facts of any kind. There are only
let's say
descriptive
you are suicidal and you want to jump from a bridge. That
I
doesn't
don't think
mean
you
that
should
you
be
have
talking
to
about the
jump
stuff on
from the
YouTube,
bridge.
probably.
I'm not even sure what that is getting at. I mean, I'm not here to defend it. I think your position is pretty consistent, but I think generally, and maybe I'm not understanding the principle or your ideas well enough, but I think that they're just, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't have much more to say, but
Can I
think
try
this
to
is
use
a
an
pretty
example?
consistent principle that is pretty consistently applicable, and I think that I don't know.
I think it's largely an invention of philosophers that there
You think
are
so?
these like oughts and shoulds and stuff. I'm not saying that this isn't worth taking seriously, and I'd love to talk about this more. Especially if maybe because we're at the tail end of this, so we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, and I feel that sort of the clock ticking. And I also understand when I articulate a view like mine, a few things to say. Almost no philosophers endorse the view that I'm expressing here. This includes other anti-realists. In fact, I literally don't know of a single publishing philosopher that endorses the view I'm describing. So it could be regarded as very fringe or very unconventional of a view. This type of super extreme normative, eliminativist account. I don't know if it actually is or it isn't. I haven't talked to enough anti-realists. I'd really love to. A couple other things I could say about that. That I don't think means that it necessarily makes it an implausible view. But what I think has really gone on is that I think that and this is very Wittgenstein here. I think that there are certain features of language, and I think that some of those features are probably going to pop up and generalize and recur in different languages, but I also think some of them might be distinctive to the English language. But I think that people get tripped up in this normative language: shoulds, oughts, goods, like an evaluative language, good, bad, must not. And I think that they often sort of take that language and think that that language just can't be translated into or reduced or like removed from the discourse without losing something. And I think that that is an illusion. It's a mirage of the way that language works. And I just think that it's not the case. And I think that philosophers often are sort of, they scavenge through language looking for these facts and principles and truths that I think just many times are just not there. And I think that's what's going on with this language. And I think that it's not just realists, but anti-realists that are buying into and playing this same analytic philosophical game where they think that there's something substantive here. And I just don't think that there is. And I think that positions like mine are probably very unattractive because who's going to want to persist in a discipline where some of the questions being asked, the question itself is the problem. And if you understand, if your understanding of language and meaning and philosophy leads to the questions themselves being fundamentally ill-formed, such that the questions themselves don't make sense to ask, it leaves you with a rather sparse terrain to explore. It's like, I think Don Loeb said something like this, like different philosophers have different positions, dispositions. And some of us have a fondness for desert landscapes. And I think that that's very much true of me, is that I don't even want a desert landscape. I want a void. I want one of those like X-Men training chambers where it's like just a room where there's nothing in it. So that's my view of a lot of these metaphysical questions and these conceptual questions. I just think a lot of them are just completely empty. And I think that that's super unappealing to people. It's like, wait, so there's nothing there? And I think sometimes the answer is just, yeah. But for me, if someone asks me like, what do you think you should act according to your preferences? I don't know how to handle that because I'm going to be a Humean all the way down. Basically, I think that the way behavior works is I think agents have goals. You could characterize them as goals, values, preferences. And then just the way that they are constituted, they just act in accordance with them. So asking me, should I act in accordance with the way that I just am going to act seems a little weird to me. It's like looking at a cloud forming rain and the rain is falling and say, well, should it rain? I think you're looking at a descriptive question and asking a normative question about it that I think just doesn't apply on my view. Of course, my view could be wrong, but on my view, the question doesn't make sense. Does that help clarify a bit where I'm coming from? Even if you disagree, I'm not saying you got to agree with me. I'm just saying, does it make sense?
It's so unbelievably unintuitive for me, at least specifically, and so it's really hard to kind of grapple with, I guess. But
sure, yeah, I'm not reporting that the view is intuitive either.
But like if I and I don't know, Lance, you probably want to close this off, so I probably shouldn't go on too long. But like if I can just ask one question, and I don't know your name, but the guy that was just talking
Griffin,
to Lance, like what else could it be? Other than I want to do the thing.
Well, it could be. Well, I'm not sure what you're asking necessarily.
Well, what are you a moral realist?
I would say so. I'm not 100% sure on either. I wouldn't, but yes, I would definitely lean towards moral realism, and I would lean towards, like I was defending before, a sort of non-naturalist, sort of G. Moore style irreducibility argument.
Well, I'm not really sure what that is, but like, well, maybe we can drop this because it would take too long. But like to me, it just seems like there couldn't be anything other than what Lance just described. Like you do things that you want to do, and that's it. That's it.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into all of this now, if people have questions for Lance, but I would say basically like there's certain, epistemic, normative, moral, normative, mathematical, like all these sorts of things would be, irreducible and a part of the world, and they would be sort of So like goodness exists as goodness in itself, and then we can recognize goodness in things, and because and logic exists, and the rules of logic exist, and we can recognize them intrinsically, and we have some way of recognize them, usually through intuition. But I don't know that much about ethical
Yeah,
intuitionism. I wouldn't.
that would probably be. It takes too long to get into all of
Yeah,
it.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
we're not going to get into that. I think we're going to wrap up. I just want to give everybody else, PKD and everybody else that's here, a chance for some final comments. So if you don't want to, then that's fine. But if you do, does anyone want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, Lance, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, thank you for engaging with your audience so much. It's nice.
Yeah, I try. I'll just say briefly on that. I do wish more people in philosophy, and then just whatever other fields in general would engage people more. I'll mention one channel I really like that's way better than mine, which is Gutsick Gibbons. Has anybody seen that channel?
Yeah, I love her. She's great. She's great.
Absolutely awesome. The explanations that make me feel like my brain is expanding because they're so good. So that covers like evolution and like hominid evolution and stuff. The channel is amazing. Please go check it out. So people that engage with like everybody outside of academia, I love when people do that. I don't even do it as well as that. I just love that channel so much. So people do that. I wish more people did it because there's so many philosophers that it would be nice to hear their perspective. So like, I guess I could say shout out to Humor, because I disagree with Humor's metaethical views, but Humor is willing to hop in and have conversations with all kinds of people and is really all over the place on YouTube. And I think that's awesome. So anyway, sorry, I took over again. So let me back. Anyone else have final comments?
Yeah, I'll just like reiterate what like PKD said, and yeah, you've been like a great host, Lance. It's been an awesome conversation all around, and yeah, I really enjoyed myself.
Awesome.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for having me. Hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, I'll consider the format here because I think this might have been a bit too many people. So I might experiment with like one person at a time, that sort of thing. I was just very eager to get people in here because I kept saying I was going to do it. And then I got caught up talking. There was just a lot of questions. I'm trying to answer everybody. It's hard to do. It's hard to do and not feel like so like you have this trade-off, right? If I'm not answering questions in the chat because I'm getting into a live conversation, then I feel like I'm letting them down. But then if I don't answer all of them or respond to them, then I'm letting you down. So there's trade-offs. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Oh yeah, and just one other thing. Thanks for always being like so responsive with like emails and stuff, Lance. I really appreciate it. You just take time out of your day.
Yeah, there's a few people I haven't responded to. So randomly I'll get an email and then I just don't respond. And then it's like 2 weeks and then it gets really awkward. And then I respond to it like 2 months later. So there's a couple people I haven't responded to. And if you're around, I'm so sorry. I'll try to get to you at some point. I try to do that. I do sometimes not respond to people. And I feel the guilt on my shoulders. Okay. Anyone else want to comment or are we good to go?
I had a quick comment, and what you said about the way philosophers interpret language reminded me of this, but I think maybe perhaps something similar is going on with reification of mental terms. So people seem to interpret things like belief and desire and intention as things that are out there floating around rather than perhaps abstract nouns, and I think that can lead to a lot of confusion.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Awesome comment. Yeah, you could take a look at Mashery has work on this, and then I just saw a paper. I just bookmarked it to read it. I think the name is LOHR or something about concepts. There's actually people that argue that they're like we should abandon the notion of concepts. Because even the notion of a concept breaks down in analysis. Anyway, so that's an awesome point to make, and I really
that would be a concept in and of itself, right?
Depending on what's meant by a concept. But I'm gonna wrap it up there and close it out. So
yeah,
I'm gonna boot all you out of there so I could do the end screen. So
good chat.
Thanks so much, everybody, for being here.
Have a good one.
Thank you, Lance.
Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody. Okay, everyone's out. It's just me. That was one of my longer streams. I didn't quite hit 4 hours, but yeah, I just really wanted to talk to people. I always say I'm going to do it, and then I didn't do it, but now I have. So now you can't tell me that I don't talk to people. So there you go. I've had a conversation with a whole bunch of people that got a little chaotic at some points, but I'd really like to do more of that. Please let me know if you like that content more than you like me talking for hours and hours. I can't keep doing it though, because I have a whole slate of videos scheduled to just keep doing this every Saturday, and I'm going to be taking hopefully less breaks and just try to be really consistent with this. So if you want to drop in, you can always email me, message me, figure out a way to contact me. If you want to set aside some time to talk to me in a live stream, I'd absolutely love it. If you think that there are philosophers or psychologists or whoever that it would be interesting to talk to during my live stream or to schedule a time outside of my live stream, let me know, leave a comment about that, whatever, all of that stuff. So I guess I'll make some closing remarks. I really want to grow this channel. I want to get it out there. So feel free to share it, post it places, do all that. You could subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. You could like the video if you haven't already. You could comment in the comment section if you haven't already. I do have there's a links in the description to if you want to provide support for me. If you want to support me, I got Substack. You could sign up for there, and I've got like a Patreon or whatever. That sort of stuff going on. I'm still haven't rolled out special stuff for people that do like extra, like they do the gold membership and that sort of stuff. I really want to do that at some point. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff I want to do, but life is chaos and it's very busy, and it's hard to really sit down and do a good job of that because I don't want to do like a really sloppy job of that. I want to make, if I'm going to have special stuff like extra posts or Q&As and that kind of thing, I want to really sit down, think about it, and do something good. And I just haven't done it. So you can keep putting pressure on me to do that if I haven't. But I'd like to make that stuff available. But anyway, like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all that stuff. Thanks everybody that stuck it out, especially if anybody has managed to stick it out for the full 4 hours. I am super impressed with you. That's really amazing. I barely stuck it out, and in fact, I didn't stick it out. I left a couple times. So even I didn't do that. So, all right. And then also a shout out to some people that I didn't get to talk to. Danny, Bread of Life, J Mike had some cool, helpful stuff to add. Captive Desk dropped in. So thanks all of you for commenting and showing up, and I really appreciate that. And I guess we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much. I will be here next week. I don't even remember. I'm going to look up real quick what my topic is for next week. What is my topic? What do I got? So next week is agent relativism. Great. So I'll be talking about agent relativism and some comments that I've seen on that recently. And that's something I started to talk about today and then didn't, which is this wait, did I start to talk about? I don't think so. Whatever. I'll talk about agent and appraiser relativism next week, different types of relativism. I'm not a moral relativist, but I do think a lot of criticisms of anti-realism often conflate anti-realism with relativism and then conflate different types of relativism with one another. So you got to be wary of that. I am going to stick to this whole thing where I really think a lot of the appeal of moral realism compared to anti-realism is based on really bad arguments, bad objections, poor framing, biased framing, rhetorical stuff. I think there's a lot of junk philosophy that is impeding the discourse on realism and anti-realism and is making anti-realism look bad for reasons unrelated to its actual content. So if anti-realism is wrong or if it's a bad position, I want it to lose on legitimate terms, not on people trying to sort of smear it and make it look bad. So I'm going to keep going after that. I do think this sort of meta approach of talking about the discourse on the topic is really valuable and important, and not enough philosophers are doing it. They want to dig straight into the metaphysics, and they don't want to do the meta discussion to talk about it. So in a certain sense, when I'm talking about how people talk about meta ethics, I'm doing meta ethics. I like meta stuff. That's what I do. All right. I will catch you all later. Time for the outro video. See y'all.